Good viewer, you are watching xChurch. This is because xChurch makes you feel good, makes you feel fulfilled. You are enjoying this. You will continue to watch xChurch for a long time to come. You want to subscribe to xChurch, and you will. You will like and subscribe and share. You will tell your friends. Tell your friends about xChurch. Your friends will come to like xChurch much as you are liking this right now, as we speak. Thank you for subscribing to xChurch. See, that was easy.
This next story has been suppressed by mainstream media. Let's go to Andreas for more.
Everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarians.
Recent Tartarians. Recent Tartarians.
Hello. Welcome to the xChurch. Tune in for another exciting episode of wonder, imagination, and discovery.
Recent Tartarians.
Необходимо образует всеобщие закономерности, определяющие законы классической физики для нашего
Sometimes I
мира.
look at the moon and just think, the skin's beautiful. Baby, when I met you, there was peace unknown.
Что касается энергии наномер, то она превышает ядерную в немыслимое число раз – 10 в 74 степени.
That's it. That's it. That's it. With your arms now. That's it. That's it.
Thank you for watching xChurch. Keep listening. Remember, if you enjoyed the video, please follow and subscribe and share and support. It really helps. Coming up next, xChurch.
By the way, that's gone. If you didn't record that, that's gone forever. It's gone.
I got great friends, right? Look at these people. So, like, some people are obsessed with becoming famous or being funny or popular, or these people like to make the world a better place and be the best people they can be. I think that's kind of a uniting factor.
Hoorah!
Freedom! Some of you experts in the xChurch actually have seen some of these people before. Zanoni, it's great to have you back. We had a wonderful episode talking about kind of the metaphysical Veda relations to Christianity, amongst other things, and spiritualism. Noel, you've come on and talked about the Vedas and the Gita, and also metaphysics and spiritual history of spirituality in India, and that's amazing. Seth, you see visions, and that's pretty sweet. And is the great grandnephew of Joseph Smith. And then Saint James Germains is a Gnostic. Would you call you Gnostic priest, or what would you say? Just a keen guy.
No. So so basically I am pretty syncretic. So I'm just a student of meditation, and that's what I care about. But I come more from Western esoteric stuff. That's kind of really the stuff that I really like. But yeah,
nice.
That's about it.
Well, this is going to be really interesting, because looking at the syncretic side of faith and all of the different aspects, kind of the opposite of what the Paulians wanted us to do. So there'll be kind of a good way to look at that. And then David Charles Plate, the rabbi guy. No, but you studied into the Midrash, and you do know you've had some experiences with spirituality and the history of Judaism. Do you want to explain actually a little bit about what Yeah, go ahead, David.
Oh, well, I'm just jumping in here. I don't know what you guys have already.
Well, just tell us a little bit about your involvement with Judaism or your studies as under the rabbi.
Okay, well, I studied with an elderly rabbi for over 10 years. I transcribed Zohar. As far as we were just talking about religious stuff, I went through ministerial training for Omni Faith Church. I was raised Christian. My mother was Jewish. She would call herself a Jew for Jesus, but she didn't really belong to the more traditional organization around that. But yeah, that's for starters. But yeah, no,
that's sweet. So that's also interesting because, you know, thinking about the early church history. So a lot of what I'm interested in, we're talking about Mormon. Wait, did we lose Jacob? Jacob.
We got a Yaakov on the call. I hope.
Did we scare Jacob off? I think we just scared him off. I hope he comes back. Maybe he's like, I don't know about this. Like, I hope he comes back. Jacob will. We'll see. Jumping back in a moment. Had to restart his computer. Something funky happened. Okay. All right. Good. I always worry now because, you know, I'll talk to people about God and Christ and they think I'm great, and then they see my intros. They're not ready. I think sometimes. Well, okay. So the thing that's interesting to me about the priesthood idea, right, is that you've got a group of people that are following, you know, in ancient times, they're following rules because they're like, how come this? And they're like, well, the variable there is very complicated. Let's call it God. And then they start explaining it and it becomes more and more explained. And people who really are fasting and thinking and they're trying to understand what their beliefs are becomes more and more complicated. But as time goes on, then there's a point where people reanalyze, right? And so Christ is really interesting because there's a reanalyzation of this idea of law. It's like, do we really need to be going around cutting off the ends of babies, like genitals? Is that what God wants of us, amongst other things, right? Because there's a lot of reasons why maybe at some point the knowable Tao, you know, was that there was some reason, like because there was no soap, or who knows what the real thing is. But something changes where they say, actually, everything's different now. We need to, it's not that different. It's the original way it was, you know, and that happens. Right. And I think that's interesting about the priesthood. Do you also, Noel, have thoughts on like the Brahmanist aspect of like, what is a Brahmin compared to a priest? You know what I mean?
I'm a fan of like the non-translatables.
Fair. Yeah. You don't like comparisons. That's right.
But like, no, it's not that I don't like comparisons. I like there's like work that has to be done before comparison can be achieved. I feel like there's not enough excavation of the actual, how do you say, the one that's being compared, or either on either side. So in one sense, I'm anti-syncretic. I like to track like all of the little details across time, which is more, it's not a synchronous reading, it's a diachronic reading of texts. So I did my master's in textual studies at the Graduate Theological Union, and I studied Sanskrit at Berkeley with the Goldmans. So I like to keep my theologies distinct. They can interact, but I am more interested in establishing their uniqueness. In some ways, I feel like the need to compare is often brought about by kind of lower needs for peace. Peace should already be the normal level. Like if we're not even at the level of peace, then we're kind of like trying to withdraw from the negative just to get to like a normal level. And comparison is often due to because some people are really worried when they see people from different religions. So even from, you know, religions like Hinduism or Buddhism, they also get worried seeing people from other religions sometimes, although some, you know, it's a spectrum. Some people are more tolerant than others, you know. But so there's like the exclusivist position, there's the inclusivist positions, but then there is the, how do you say this? There's got to be some word for it. What's beyond the inclusivist? There's like plural religious identities where like a person can practice more than one religion simultaneously. And in that regard, how I feel about things is that if they do so, they should first be able to keep both sides distinct before they start the syncretic process.
Yeah, though the word for that would really be theurgy, which is God working, right? And to kind of amend the syncretic part, it's important.
I'm not trying. I'm listening.
Yeah. Sorry to cut you off too.
You didn't.
The non-perennialist philosophy. You know, you can't have, you know, a bunch of white guys that went to Tibet and decided, you know, this one's cool, this one sucks, I don't know what the hell this is, you know. Oh, look, Jesus is in this one, we'll keep that one too. You know, that's not syncretism. That's not useful, you know. So,
well,
but to keep
why is it not useful, and what is useful? Like, what is the useful way of learning from each other's religions?
To understand, so like so the thing that I posted in the one group comes from the Hermetica, right? The Corpus Hermetica, and it talks about it's I believe it's Asclepius speaking to a king, right? And he's explaining how the and I couldn't find it on the internet, so it's on there for people to read. But it's basically like he's describing how people who are expressing, religious truths, they're like musicians, right? And they all may know the song, they know the music, but they also have to play it through an instrument, right? So the sound that comes out is not, it's not the song that's in your head, and probably never can be, because there's a certain point where words become falsehood, describing things that are not like intelligible to a degree, but not, it's not primary to them, right? So the idea of that is that everybody, all cultures have their musicians that are playing the divine song for others to hear it, but their lyre might be out of tune, or it might be slightly off, and that's not the fault of the musician. It's actually the fault of the lyre, right? Which is a guitar. It sounds like liar, like you're telling a lie, but Lyre, right? It's like Greek guitar, right? So so everybody's playing the song that's in their head, but it'll sound different, and it'll sound dissonant coming from different different musicians, right? But there's actual harmony there, but sometimes not with the expression of it, right? And that's like a really important thing to keep in mind when you are crossing traditions, or if you want to go take empowerment into this practice, or you want to visit this temple, you want to be a welcome guest. That's really what a modern syncretic Gnostic even figure is somebody who's welcome, is a welcome guest in any tradition. And they may actually be conferred titles, empowerments, status, in some cases, a saint might be recognized. And I'm being sarcastic about this. That was a nickname somebody told me, because I love the story of Saint Germain, yeah. But in any case, they might recognize somebody and give them a whole system, or and all the senior students behind them would be pissed off about it, and that can cause problems. But that's something that happens, and quite frankly, the only one that has ever been exclusive to itself and denied everything else was Christianity. And not all Christianity, but the one line that
Pauline,
all other cultures are like, the F is this guy talking about, is I am the way, and only through me can you reach the Father, right? It's the only line that stinks of editing, right? Because if you think about it, you look at the stories, right? It's the same Archangel Gabriel that announced the birth of Jesus, right? It's the same Gabriel that visited Muhammad and took him to the farthest mosque, right? And if you're into Western Hermeticism, it's the same Gabriel that is called upon, right? In fact, if you watched that documentary on the Greek Orthodox Church, right? Or I'm sorry, the
Coptic
church on Mount Athos,
Mm.
right? That's been there since the Byzantine Empire, right? And if you watch and you pay close attention, when they start showing their process, which we're lucky to see because 60 Minutes got invited, and I think they were like the second people that were actually invited to videotape and all of that, and actually shown kind of stuff that they don't really show. They are basically doing liturgy to Gabriel, right? So down here, right, in the world, we have our cultures, right, that are informed by the terrain that we're in, everything we grew up with, and everything, all the stuff that we see, right?
But we have Christian
and that's
militancy that's like erased. Or sorry, keep going.
Yeah. I mean, sure. Yeah, we'll get into that. But at the top, right, that writing from the Corpus Hermeticum is important because that song, right, that song that people get in their head, that's one, that comes from the good. That's one, right? That's the Sophia. That's wisdom, and that never changes. In fact, things on that level down here don't change either. All is ever as it was. No one's been lifted up or brought down, right? It's in the book of the law, right? So it's like yonder beggar may be a king, right? And you'll see the king metaphor actually is very, it comes from Hermes, right? So yonder beggar may be a king, right? But you can't, the line is basically saying you can't tell from their appearances, right? So the same with religions, right? You might have the light of the gnosis in a church, in whatever, right? But on the outside, you see the colors, the smells, what people, how people act, right? Which is also another illusion, because you have crazy wisdom, you have crazy wisdom masters.
Right. Yeah, it seems like the Gnostics can exist in like different groups of churches, and they interact basically by keeping, themselves from becoming a church, because then they would be like criticized from all angles, but instead they can kind of permeate the wiser members of their group. David, as a Jew, or talking about rabbis, like what's the difference between a rabbi and a priest? Or aren't some rabbis priests of Cohen or priests of different tribes? How does that work? What do they do?
Oh, well, that's a kind of a loaded question.
Yeah.
It depends on who you talk to. But no, I mean, traditional Cohen as a high priest is an entirely different thing than we see today. In fact, I would say that if you're talking about organized religions in general, and we're having these conversations, if you're talking about what that meant in ancient times and what it means now, there's a big enough gulf of distinction there that it's almost like we're having an entirely different conversation, right? I mean, the high priest that takes the name to the top of the temple, and does the task, like there's so much purification involved in that. I don't even know if it's possible, like the world that we live in today with all the chemicals and all the everything, considering like, Kabbalistically, like how people would relate to the klipot as anything that's outside of the shefa, because the shefa is our essence, it's our pure source. Like anything that's outside of that influences our consciousness, right? And so at this point, what would that even mean? Like there are those who argue that that revelation, which is prophecy, isn't even necessarily like possible today like it was in ancient times, because of our environment and our ability to purify ourselves within our environment. I don't know if I'm answering your question at all, but
but you're kind of inferring like a priest job, or like the Kohanic, which is
well,
the Aaronic priesthood, they clean,
yeah,
they sacrifice, they atone.
what is the task? Everything, all the
Yeah.
context changes. So like when people are talking about religious practices and things, there was reasons for why we did things way back when. Like you were bringing up circumcision. Like if you're talking about like if somebody doesn't eat pork back when, like, you know, or, you know, certain kinds of crustaceans or whatever, it's like there's reasons for that. If you're in the desert, like you have to be careful because people got sick, and they're like, yeah, maybe we don't want to make ourselves sick or have other problems, bacterial issues and all kinds of things. Like with circumcision, like I've transcribed ancient texts where it's describing the practices that go along with circumcision for how you're relating to your own genitalia, and like all of the spiritual work that you're doing of focusing your energy on the tip and this whole thing. It's a life path. So it's like, and then people treat it now that it's just more of like a fashion statement. Like I'm, you know, just, this is maybe irrelevant here, but I feel like it's worth mentioning, like my own personal feelings around that kind of thing. It's like, I don't think doctors should ever bring it up. Like, I don't think doctors should ever bring that up to anybody. Like, there's no reason to. And also, like, idealistically, from a personal standpoint, like, I feel it should be up to the mother. Like, I'm not even sure if the father should have a say. Like, ultimately, like, and in terms of like, if you're arguing that it's connected to Judaism,
yeah.
If you're talking about, you know, and I'm not like,
it looks nice.
That's a matter of opinion, and you're welcome to that opinion. You know,
it's become a fashion thing.
You win a race.
Right.
Let the mom decide.
That's my feeling. I'm not saying it's like any authoritative thing. Like, I'm just, you know, that's my feeling about it, you know.
All right, but you just really quickly before we get to Seth, you were saying in the Zohar though, like there's energy work that's focused in the bris, so it's really more than
the Zohar per se, but I have come across it in my studies, like where, you know, we're transcribing text and it's describing these kind of like, I guess the best you could put it is like meditations that go along with it. So like why it is, what is the functionality of that? And it's so funny because when this debate happens, I never hear anybody talking about that. Like, you know, I don't know.
Okay, so Seth, you were thinking thoughts. You said you wanted to come at this from like an atheist perspective.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm very curious to see what you guys would say to this approach to thinking about it. Just first of all, to reiterate the question, it sounds like you were asking, like, what's the proper approach to some sort of religious syncretic project? Where how do we aggregate the best teachings for ourselves or a collective? And so my thoughts on this are, from an evolutionary perspective, I look at all of this through a lens of game theory. Right. My meta-ethical framework is through game theory. My thoughts about God is the personification of game theory. You know, all of these, even the concept of a king. The king is the master of the game theory for his population. Right. Survival is the game of evolution. And the strategy, the game theory, is what are the best rules? What are the best practices that help us survive and continue and propagate? Right. And the concept of Sophia, the concept of wisdom, I view wisdom as the understanding of the game theory, right? The higher level perspective, the 3D chess perspective, right? And so when I think of like this religious syncretic approach, we've got all of these religious traditions. What are we supposed to do with this? My default take is we should kind of think about our current context. What is the survival constraints on our current context? And then, so we have to apply the game theoretic strategy to our here and now. And then we go back to these traditions and we try to see if these principles are relevant to our current context. And then we can aggregate all of the ones that are helpful, disregard the ones that are not helpful.
So my concern with that is that historically that's what leads to pedophiles ruining churches in Hollywood, right? So because you start with like Sadducees, and then Sadducees stop following covenants that let them literally manifest revelation, where they're seeing Star Wars apparitions of Vedic avatars and gods, right? It's like something really neat's happening when you're starving yourself and you're focusing. I don't know. Maybe there's the crystals in your blood and radio, or maybe it's something more. But maybe maybe it's something less. If you're having those experiences, though, you're going to be very different than somebody who's just gluttonous, sinning, and they breaking their, like, they're not living the way you have to live in order to receive, to be in yoga. I don't know what you want to call it. So when you achieve that kind of bhakti like feeling, it's different. And when you don't have that, especially for like a generation, then you have to start looking for something to replace it. So you start looking for the laws, and you start finding like, well, this works for me and that works for me. And then you're like, well, we really, people just look better when they cut off the ends of their wieners. So it becomes like for the wrong reasons, because the knowable Tao becomes the material shell of the reason. And then after a generation, they get used to not seeing signs, right? So then there's never been a reason before, because they've lost context of what it was that they were even doing in the first place, where they felt like that Moses spark, that Havelockian, that divine correctness, that wisdom or whatever it is. People get used to not having it. And then I think that's where they decide which rules benefit the elite the most. You know what I mean? And that's my concern. But also, wait, Jacob. I want. Well, go ahead. No, wait. Zanoni wanted to speak, and then Jacob's going to rant. It's going to be amazing.
Okay. I want to get back to what you're talking about, St. Germain's, about the melody. But I have a question. Just starting with.
You can just call me James if you want.
Okay, cool. With what you're saying just about Jesus freeing us from, just the Mosaic Law, let's say. I'm wondering, Noel, I'm wondering what your thoughts are about Jesus maybe freeing us from the Hindu law as well. The whole system that existed.
Well, hold on, because that's going to be the next subject. So, we're going to go there. But first, I want to get Jacob to introduce a bit about, what do you believe about restoration of these laws? So, if people used to believe these things, Sadducees destroy them, they become unable to have revelation, become atheists, and all of a sudden, there's a way to get back to that, right? Do you believe in something like, what do you believe, man?
Now, are you asking me if I believe in continuing revelation going on today?
That too. I'm asking that too. But I guess it's more about because we're talking about priesthood, man. So what's the point of being, because the early Christians were called saints. We're supposed to perform miracles. So what do you believe about all that?
I believe all of it is supposed to be there. So a little bit of context on just my background. I was born and raised Latter-day Saint. I had last time you and I conversed, life-changing experience. I guess they would refer to it as a baptism of fire, born again type of experience in January of 2020. Right before all of the COVID crap, and I ended up getting myself kicked out of the church officially. But it was huge eye-opening, because among the things that I firmly believe is, hey, we're in this world right here. It is a lost and fallen world. There is a heavenly realm, and there is a process by which we reconnect with that heavenly realm. I got a very slight taste of what that is like, being connected with the heavenly realm. It filled me with a measure of heavenly love like I had never experienced before. And I'm a good dude by the standards of the world. By just about in any country, if you were to say, hey, how does this guy live his life? I was a good dude by those standards. I got changed. And when I felt that connection with the heavenly realm, it humbled me. It flattened me like a pancake. And it significantly affects the way that I behave now. Okay. So what's the religion that I profess, and what's this with priesthood and everything else? I think all of that connects to us making that connection with the heavenly realm that now that affects the way that we interact with everyone around us. I'm a firm believer that God has spoken to prophets in the past, and that all of us are meant to be able to make that kind of connection with the heavenly realm today. A very firm believer in that. I'm just going to give one anecdote from the book of Moses. It was a translation from Joseph Smith, and he claims that this was an inspired translation of the book of Genesis. Moses, in the first chapter, has an encounter with God where, bam, taken up into the heavenly realm, and he is shown things that we cannot learn in our regular physical bodies. He sees all the inhabitants on this planet that ever were, that ever will be. He is shown then worlds without number, numberless. And he asked the question, God, for what purpose is all this? Please be patient with me. What's the reason for all of these worlds with inhabitants on them? and he's only given a partial answer. Well, for mine own purposes. I kind of interpret that as like the way that I might respond to my little kid who wouldn't have the background for me to give a full answer for what he's asking me.
Other stuff.
Yeah, but then he says to Moses, this, what you're seeing, all of these worlds with that number, this is my work and my glory, to bring to pass the eternal life, the immortality and eternal life of mankind. So we're experiencing our version of that right now. In this planet that has sickness and death, also has happiness and beauty and everything else. And things like priesthood and continuing revelation are part of the things that connect us with the heavenly realm in our journey.
All right.
I hope that was a satisfying.
So every time you speak, it's like Jules. I'm glad you left that church to give me an apostle of this one. We're winning
At
here.
some point, he's going to figure out I'm just an AI program from the future.
Well, sometime we're gonna make you. It's gonna be great. Noel and Zanoni like fight each other over this idea. So in the terms of because I know you know, Noel, I asked you what Brahmins do, and you just decided to tell me about distinction, like some politician or something. But when we're talking about priesthood and saints, I mean, do you have this idea of the ascension of the soul, right? Is there a process that is like similar of being isn't a Brahmin kind of a priest who is that right? I mean, no. What do you think?
No,
it's not like a priest. And why not?
Okay, you're gonna have to let me rant, but
that's what you're here for.
I'm not a fan of ranting. I stopped.
I don't like to do this.
I stopped at establishing a well-excavated understanding of a particular tradition before it interacts with another well-excavated understanding of another tradition. And it must be said that the Hindu tradition is not excavated. And so starting with that, I will say it is distinct. And I can start with the material explanation. And one is that the accusations that the Brahmana is somehow on the top of a food chain is simply a British paradigm breaking back of the culture. It's not we who are occupying you. Look, it's that other guy. He's been all along occupying you.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
Let me finish. You will stop. You will not interrupt me. So a Brahmana is traditionally poor. He does not have the accoutrements of the Catholic Church. He doesn't have wealth. In fact, the Brahmana is cursed to have no wealth. And the king used to use the Brahmanas to distribute all of his social welfare, you could say dispensation to the Brahmanas, because by the end of the day, they have to get rid of all their possessions. And the Brahmanas were actually cursed by Lakshmi never to have wealth. And that comes from the story of Bhrigu, who was a sage who tried to find out between Shiva, Brahma, and Vishnu, who was the highest god. And all the rishis got together and they said, we got to figure out which one of these guys is the highest one. And so first Bhrigu went to Lord Shiva, and Lord Shiva is his brother, actually, according to the lore. And Lord Shiva and Bhrigu are brothers, right? So when Lord Shiva came and saw, when Bhrigu came to his abode and Shiva saw him, Shiva became very happy. Oh, my brother's come. He comes and runs to him, and Bhrigu goes, oh, you're so dirty. You're covered with ash and snakes and skulls. Don't touch me. And Lord Shiva is easily angered, and he pulls up his trident, like he's going to destroy the whole world. And thereupon he realized, oh, Lord Shiva is very easy to anger. Let me try Lord Brahma. Actually, Parvati stopped Lord Shiva from annihilating Bhrigu. It says in the Bhagavad Gita, Maharishinam Bhriguraham, of all the rishis I am Bhrigu, because Bhrigu is a bit of a rascal. He's willing to test things. So he tested Lord Shiva. Then he went to Brahma, and he is like the son of Brahma. So he went before his father and he did not bow down. And so Lord Brahma didn't externally show anything, but he saw just like a little flash in his eye, and that's all that he saw. But Brahma, oh, my son, come here. But Brahma likes everything to be very regulated and orderly. Dharma is very orderly, like a universal order, like it's a natural universal order. So Dharma cannot be religion. It's grounded in nature, the nature of the cosmos. And by cosmos I mean the world. The nature of the world is structured out of Dharma. Dharma makes the sun rise. Dharma makes the sun set. So Brahma has a little glint of anger. Next, he goes to Vishnu, who's lying down sleeping. He runs up to him and kicks him in the chest. And Vishnu comes up and he says, "Oh, my devotee is here. Let me massage your feet. You have walked so far." And he begins to rub Bhrigu's feet. And Lakshmi became upset because Lakshmi resides on the chest of Vishnu. And, Vishnu sat him down, washed his feet, massaged his feet, gave him all kinds of nice words. "You're such a great sage. Please give us some instruction today," in like a very mild, benign, and gentle manner. He kicked him straight in the chest, and Vishnu said, "Oh, my chest is as hard as a thunderbolt, I've been told. And your delicate feet of a sage, you're always in meditation. You don't go very far, and you've come all the way to me. I must have made some offense. I was sleeping when you came to my place. I did not welcome you properly. Please give me some way to satisfy you so that you can bless me with your teachings." So then he realized, okay, Vishnu is... Anyway, so at that time, the Brahmanas got cursed by Lakshmi because Lakshmi always resides on the chest of Vishnu in the form of a golden line. And so Brahmanas are not supposed to have wealth. So they do not have the kind of superstructure that the Catholic Church had. And also, they did not retain their knowledge of Sanskrit only for their own purposes, but they taught all the four Varnas. I've seen it in the Ramayana. I've seen verses. If a Shudra reads the Ramayana, he gets XYZ blessing. That means the Shudra knows Sanskrit. So who taught him Sanskrit? Well, it's the Brahmanas. And who does the weddings of the Shudras? It's the Brahmanas. And who does the horoscopes of the Shudras? It's the Brahmanas. In fact, the Brahmana is the most abused and sort of like attacked person of the whole Hindu tradition, the custodian of culture. And that's exactly what the British wanted. They wanted to attack the custodian of the culture. And I must say, the very question shows that it has not been excavated, at least in the popular mind. And if you read Bhagavad Gita, it says, Krishna says, Chaturvarnam maya shristam, I created the four Varnas, Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Sudra, I created them. And Guna Karma Vibhagasha, they are divided according to one's qualities, like their characteristic, and their actions. It says nothing about birth. So there are, of course, people in any system who will try to, use whatever they can to control others. But I never had this experience. In fact, every time I go to India, I never had experience where some Brahmana mistreated me. And technically, I would be not even in their system, being born in another land. I'm not even like a Shudra, so I don't even have that status. I have never been mistreated by them. And if you go today, you'll see so many Brahmanas are just poor. Like they're even just sweeping the streets, cleaning the sewers. They're not able to practice their thing. The British were very successful in that. They couldn't convert them for a long time, and eventually they did break them a bit through this.
But so the thing is your perspective on the priesthood is a very specific, and it's only excavated the Catholic Pauline priesthood. Because when I was talking about the priesthood, that's not the one I was thinking of. I mean, the guy didn't even show up tonight. So when I'm thinking of the priesthood, I'm thinking of like the St. Thomas apostles who went to India, for instance, in the 1st century, the Bogomils, the Cathars, monks, people who were living poorly like Brahmin. I mean, I don't know, and Zanoni, maybe you have some thoughts on this. Like some of the early Christians were kind of like Brahmins in the sense that they were giving each other what they had. It wasn't super episcopos or presbyteros hierarchy. Like, do you have any?
No, that's not the point. The point is they do not have a social structure which makes them rich. Number one. Number two, they do not have a secret language like Latin. Okay,
but it's only the Catholic Church. Again, we're talking. You're specifically talking about the Catholic.
You're talking about Europe. You're talking about Europe, and so here's the thing.
Okay.
When the missionaries went to India, you have to realize this is around like 1600s. Lutheranism is kind of a new thing. There's still lots of Catholics in Europe. So when Indology began, it has a bunch of like anti-Semitic presuppositions that it says, oh, here is a Brahmana who is like the Jew, who manipulates, they have all this kind of, it's in their writing. If you go and you read like German Indology, you can see this stuff. So it's not like, they have a different quality, and they sort of just said, oh, here is like, so those who are in like the Reformation consciousness, and they're like, oh, we got to reform the church. Those guys said, oh, here's that same problem that we face. Okay, the Brahmana's the problem. So like they just took their own lens and it superimposed on it. And since that time, all that we know about these people is produced essentially by the academics of the world who their universities go back into, the Protestant Reformation and back into Catholicism. And, you have a bunch of unexcavated baggage.
Perennialism.
Yeah, that you're just
I agree with you on
projecting
that.
onto those guys, and so they don't have a secret language. For example, Charlemagne, he can't even read. He's entirely dependent on the church. Think about how much power these guys had. And I think that is like really underestimated. That's the essential point there. The whole social structure is very different.
Okay.
I think Andreas, you're talking about the early church, 1st century Thomas.
Always contextual.
My question is more about getting back to just that starting point of Jesus freeing us possibly from the Mosaic law, if you adopt that. I'm wondering what your thoughts are, Noel, about maybe Jesus's role in relation to Hindu law, the Hindu path. The Hindu path is very difficult. It's an extremely difficult path to get free on. And could there possibly be this merciful option that Christ provides?
Yeah, Bakti. So Lord Ram says, even if one says to me one time, Lord, I'm yours, I'm unable, but I'm yours. And he says, for all time, I stay with that person and I never abandon him. Even just once, even accidentally, even in drunken state, in any state, right? One who takes the name of the Lord is saved. That's, so here's the thing. Salvation is actually not that hard in Hinduism. It's devotion that's hard to get, because you can be paid off with entertainment or escapism. But if to get the power to love God with all your heart sort of brings him under your influence, so he's not going to give you devotion to him so easily. So the difficulty is Hinduism is such a complex and steep, it's a very steep learning curve. And you could say, if you go to India, everybody is like, if you're not like a very studious person, you're not going to be able to fully understand it, but you can certainly participate in it. It's not like elitist, but it gets very complicated. And that's my basic premise is this thing is very complex. It's very I agree with you. It's demanding. It is extraordinarily demanding. But the salvation is easily had. There are other things that are concerns of Hindus that are difficult, so to speak.
It's interesting that you mentioned Bakti, because historically Bakti did not really become prevalent within Hinduism until after Jesus. It's around around the 1st century is when the Bakti movement really developed. No?
Not at all true.
Isn't it one of the limbs of the Ashtanga tree in the first place?
Mahabharata. How old's Mahabharata?
So how old is that? Like Moses' time? 2,000 years?
We don't know how old it is. That's the thing. Getting older all the time. That's the problem. It seems to have been sort of solidified around 500 BCE. But I even I don't want to get my teachers too much involved. But I participate in academia, and now they're speculating. Actually, this is even older than we thought. Maybe 1500 BCE. It's just there's no mention of Buddhism, so it's pre-Buddhist,
Have you read
the Narayaniya section? When we finish the Narayaniya section of the Mahabharata, is all about Bhakti. And Bhagavad Gita, I'm sorry, I'll debate anyone. Bhagavad Gita is entirely about Bhakti. It brings all the yogas under Bhakti, all of them, right? So it says it right there. All the definitions, Krishna gives definitions for all those things. Sarva Guyatamam Shrinu Bhuyame.
Right, but he's right. It's like 2,000 years ago. If you're talking Gita,
huh?
If you're talking Gita, that's like 2,000 years ago.
The Gita is potentially at this point 3,500 years ago, according to the newest academic. Yeah, he just keeps going.
They used to say around 2,000.
No, that's not what they said. They said it seems to be no. I studied in South Asian studies.
You're an expert. You're the expert. I'm not claiming to be. So you are. So
I have associated with experts. I would say I have associated.
Okay.
What's interesting? No. What's interesting? Sorry, I don't know who I'm stepping on. What's interesting about what you said, that Bhakti is kind of like it's held up here. And it's something to be achieved. It's not like you could do hatha all day if you want, right? Or the other steps, but that's like the crowning achievement. And it's like so Socrates, right? his definition of piety is that the gods love you, not that you love the gods, right? So you could love God all day, right? Or the gods, the deities, whatever deity you're worshiping, but that's not piety, right? It's not piety until there's a response, right? Where God loves you back, right? And that's the whole thing about the success in Bakti, is not that you're building yourself up into this fit of devotion based on your imagination, and you're doing all this stuff that everybody else told you to do, and saying words that are probably foreign to you, or somebody else wrote them, and all this stuff. It's not about that, so there's like a crowning achievement there. And I think the biggest confusion about Christianity, that it's sort of spread, is that that's the only practice, right? And it's not. Or that's like, I'd put it this way, right? That's a home run, right? If you actually succeed in that, that's a home run. There's nothing else that's more.
If you're able to please God,
that's the end goal.
If you're able to please God, like beyond just being saved, you actually bring a smile, or like a very good, like a kind of a pleasant sensation,
right?
Pleasant sensation in the heart of the Lord.
It's like you're,
that's
right.
Not so,
you're smaller than an ant, right? So like your tiny little thoughts about images of images that you got from a book, that may not hear it. Like, what complaints have you heard from the ants in your backyard? Probably none, right? In fact, I'll probably say it's none. But if an ant was like making so much noise, in fact, if there was an ant that was glowing in your backyard, right? I personally would want to go talk to that ant. I'd at least go and check it out and say, what the hell is this thing, right? It's glowing.
We stand back a
right?
few feet.
Yeah, fortunately for us, God has the ability to, be it 100%,
confer all those things.
100% attentive to each of us. Times.
Yeah.
Fortunately for us.
And overarching this whole conversation is that there's never been any separation at all. And that's the realization, right? There's another part in the Hermetica, right? That there's only the created and the creator and the created, right? So you have generated matter, right? The one quality of a God is that it's not generated, right? It was always there. And that's
in Hinduism, the Atma has no beginning, middle or end. It has not. What is it? It has not come into being. It does not come into being. It will not come into being. It is everlasting, primeval.
Isaiah 43:17 is the same thing as the Elohim. The El. So the father of the Elohim, because Elohim is plural, but it says that the Father comes before all things, and then again, the Father is more like El is even a bigger concept than Father. But so to me, this is the thing. If you get to the root of this thing, they are really similar until they start to be horrible later. So like Catholicism, and I get it, like they murder people, Lutherans murder people, there's racism, etc. But again, looking at my romanticized Disney-fied version of early Christianity, we're here, you look at the Bogomils, the Cathars, the Valentinians, the Marcionites, the Ebionites, which is kind of like David's mom. There's different kinds of groups that were chill, and they seem to be more about, kind of providing information. And so it wasn't until like the Marcionites said, hey, we should get rid of the Old Testament because that's like a different God. God's full of love now. It's clearly different. So let's just burn those books. That they even wanted canons, or like, this is what we believe and not what we believe. So early Christianity was a little different. In fact, a lot different, because Paul murdered so many freaking Christians, right? So he was really banking on this idea that we've got atonement law, which, David, let's talk about atonement law in a second. But just this idea that if you kill a guy, or you kill or you rape a girl, you have to get 2 chickens and 50 shekels. And so it's like it gets to be very expensive if everyone's sinning all the time. So if you sacrifice, instead of a sheep, a shepherd, You know what I mean? And it's got this quality, right? Because it's like, now we're deciding that this is it's immortal, it's the Isaiah thing, so it's a God, so it's omnipresent, it's before, it's the after. So this is a sacrifice for everybody. This is great for Paul because he's a murderer, right? And I'm not saying he's only a murderer, but this is like, we're really banking on this, that Christianity is about God wanted Jesus to die, that God killed Jesus, which I'm pretty sure it was man who killed Jesus. God made Jesus, man killed Jesus. And so the early Christians, a lot of them were like, actually, man was bad to do that, and God didn't like that, and we were supposed to learn how to live like Jesus, right? And those Christians got killed a lot.
He was supposed
turned into cannibalized.
I think it's horrible that they killed their teacher, but despite it seems he was such a good teacher that people still grow from him. So.
So two things happen there, right? One, he was supposed to bring a new Talmud, right, to the world, and that didn't happen, right? So Christians don't actually have the written teachings of Jesus as it was his pen. It was really actually his disciples, right? And that's where Muhammad comes in, right? He came back to do what Jesus didn't get the chance to do. And then a second thing happened that was really unique to Jesus, in that he created a new way of reaching liberation, which was martyrdom, right? So he basically, with his death, he consecrated this way of how would I say it? Like apotheosis. Way. I'm not sure the word to use there, but that martyrdom is actually a spiritual path now, right? And I don't think people would decide to be martyrs, but that's a sacrifice. In fact, that's the highest sacrifice that you could make, right? You're actually, everything that you're told is real by your senses, right? Your actual vehicle here on earth, to sacrifice that is like the ultimate sacrifice.
Absolutely.
And he wasn't.
I think that's the root of Christian militancy.
Yeah,
right.
I wouldn't blame the Christians. I mean, it's hard to understand a mystic. I wouldn't hold it over them, and I don't even hold the slaughter of all the pagans, or the Crusades, or any of that stuff, or the New World. None of that. The only point I was making is that the power structure, which has been, the Brahmins are in the top of the power structure, the Brahmins are in the top of the power structure, they're the Illuminati. That is not true at all. That's totally.
I'm sorry, I didn't even mean to make that acquaintance. I mean,
no.
The Jesuits are that.
Right. It's been made for you. It's manufactured.
Well, does
I don't think of the Jesuits that way.
I'm not trying to shoot you down here. I'm just pointing out that Bakti is as old as the Mahabharata in the Narayaniya section, which is part of the Moksha Dharma. And it's all Bhakti. And then Bhagavad Gita, practically every chapter ends on devotion. Just
right. Go ahead, Zanoni. Sorry.
Yeah. So I wanted to hear Zanoni's response.
No, just two questions. Well, two things. So in terms of citing my sources, the whole thing about Bhakti that connects to Stephen Prothero's book, Religion is Not One. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. It's a great book.
Right.
When he does a whole chapter on Hinduism, and he says Bhakti starts in the 1st century, basically. But James, I'm wondering, that connection you made between Jesus and Muhammad, can you explain that again? I don't see that connection.
Mohammedanism is like the least passive Gnosticism. Keep going.
So, first I have to say I'm not a scholar. So I'm not really going to have I can't cite references in books per se, and especially I can't speak for Platonism on that front either. I wouldn't dare, because
don't get scared. You're good.
Yeah, there's people who spent, the past 10 years in the books, and that doesn't that's not the living thing for me. So it's just, as much as it's useful, that's the thing for me. So there's evidence. how would I say this?
It says Muhammad in the Bible
So-
like many times because Muhammad means the sweet one. So it's a title that is referred to Jesus and also in Solomon. And there's in the wisdom of Solomon. And Sophia is referred to as the sweet one as well.
Interesting. Yeah, and the main thing for me personally is that you have you know, an angel from Abrahamic traditions that has and I'd ask this guy over here if you know, if it's in Jewish mysticism as well. And this guy's cool too. But you know, you have all these guys.
Well,
Anyway,
Jacob's gonna know about
so you
Moroni
have
and like there's
Gabriel.
theories that Gabriel's Moroni, you know, too.
Ooh. Oh, that's interesting.
And you're talking about like okay. That's Mormonism, right? Yeah, Mormonism. Okay, I'll just say, yeah, we'll go by that. Yeah. So the way you described it, it sounded like a light body visitation, right? You said something like, you know, it's like Star Wars, right? I mean, Star Wars is drawing from that. So there's like, you know, like it can't be simplified so much because there's so much in between, right? When I was saying there's the home run, that's like you don't need saints, you don't need masters, you don't need angels, you don't need spirits, you don't have to care about demons, you don't have to do any of those things because you made it to the one of the terrestrial gods that pulled you up, right? And then there's the one, the monad, right? That's unintelligible. A human mind can't grasp that, so it's kind of not worth talking about too much. But there's so much in between that constitutes the religious systems and why this tradition focuses on this and this one focuses on this. It's really based on the noetic experiences of their past saints and also their prophets, which is a particular type of being. It's not a you and me, you know. Like Jesus was born. First of all, immaculate birth is in many different cultures, right? We don't have scientific proof.
Do the Mormons know what immaculate birth means?
There.
I just want to explain because I don't think the Mormons do this, and so it's an interesting idea. So the idea that Jesus. Go ahead. Sorry.
I'm just making sure that I understand it from an LDS perspective. The idea that Jesus the mother of Jesus was not impregnated by a mortal,
and she was immaculate for Christ to be. She had to have been born without original sin.
Yeah,
that's the idea. With
Means
Mary.
Yeah,
isn't that
she's
kind of the whole thing
virginal.
that she's pure? Isn't that
She's
the
the
emphasis?
incarnate of
And then we
Sophia.
kind of like extrapolate these different ideas from that, but that was like the main point.
A lot of people, because she was pure, though, the association that she's the incarnate of Sophia, because in Proverbs 8 and most of Proverbs, it's actually Sophia who's speaking. It's the wisdom who was there before the beginning, that when God created everything. And in the Catholic Bible, it's even more clear because it says like she was formed and she is a body and she's separate. And so the idea that Sophia is, you know, beyond the word is logos, and logos has also to do with Sophia, that she's, you know, for a long time Catholics were trying to just call her the Holy Spirit. Like, no, really, the Nicene Creed is missing the quaternity. There really is a heavenly mother, which is what the Mormons have suggested. And the Veda, you know, of course, has, I mean, I'm sorry to make the connections, but like the idea that gods are married is, you know, at least on that level, there's a similarity. And that's
So there's
don't beat me up.
there's a really important idea floating around in here that I'd feel bad if it wasn't said, but so like a lot of people, a lot of you have already said something about the modern state of things where we have these traditions, right? That they're, you know, so the one thing that's missing, right? Or one thing we could say about the modern world is that ethics are not, they have to be proven again, right? So you have purity of lifestyle, right? That's a thing all into itself, right? Mary, the mother of Jesus, had to be a virgin, right? She had to be pure because otherwise she wouldn't have been able to capacitate that birth, right? So,
It's like
you know, yeah, in a way, it's like the conditions have to be there for it's like, you know, Jesus had a birth chart, you know, Mary had a birth chart. Everybody's birth chart kind of determines what's possible for them, not necessarily what's going to happen. You can predict by that, but the point is that, you know, it's like a master, right? A master, what we could call Jesus a master or beyond, but, you know, like, you know, let's say Patanjali wants to come back, right? He's not going to incarnate to a mother that's smoking cigarettes at the bar right now, you know,
I have to push back.
that has had, right? That has had, you know,
Prahlad, the demon saint in Hinduism. You can be born a demon and be a saint. There's nothing like that.
It all depends. Right. So it depends on
at least for that
tradition,
like that system. So that part cannot be common. Although I think in general it is correct that it does help. You know, Prahlad, he could.
So
his father tried to throw him in the ocean, tried to set him on fire, tried to poison him, and he's just sitting there smiling benignly. 5-year-old
Narasimha.
Yeah. He comes and destroys the demon. He's born as a demon saint. He's a demon saint, and he's told that was demons. But he's a devotee of God. He's a demon saint.
Yeah, and I was
like a
actually told funny story.
Demon saint.
Yeah, I was actually told he's Narasimha is my Ishta Devata, but that was because the astrologer was Vedic. He was part of Krishna temple here, and so it's actually Hanuman instead. But
tantrics also,
but to not lose the point.
Not unsurprising.
What's that?
Tantrics also worship Narasimha, so it's not unexpected.
Yeah.
But okay, I want to ask also Jacob about like apostasy, because this idea that the church falls into apostasy, or that like these priests, because like the thing, you know, Noel brought up is like, well, no, they're not like those guys. Those guys fell into apostasy. That's kind of the way I look at that.
Wait, who fell into apostasy?
The Vatican.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I don't blame the Vatican at all. Actually, I love the
I'm saying I think though that the church fell into apostasy in the first century when they said, "Satan, get behind me." Yeah, give him the keys, and maybe the whole idea
church in the first century.
Okay, yeah, and until I mean, a church is a conversation. The church is a conversation. So what's interesting about the church, and now I'm interrupting Jacob.
Oh no, you're good. Dude, I'm gonna lay some good stuff.
Sweet. I just want to say it's really interesting that Jesus is at this point in 30-40 AD, because 70 AD is the end of the temple, and so all of a sudden there's a mass exodus of all these people that go all over the world, right? So now you've got this culture that's forced to integrate into everyone else's culture, which is why you have St. Thomas, Vedic influenced Christianity in India, and why you have Gnostics and Bogomils and Valentines, and you have Turkic Christians versus the Islamic Gnostification, which really, you know, when they start killing all of these different Christians, the Muslims just defend themselves more, so they become radicalized and more violent. But if you look at the very earliest stuff, they're talking about Jesus. They're talking about, you know, this Bogomilism. They're talking about this beyond God thing. And then they're talking about archetypes and demons and angels and everything. It's really just a form of Christianity that got further and further away as they said, no, we're not like you. Right. So sorry, Jacob.
Dude, you're totally good. I'm going to just throw out some patterns just from a scriptural perspective, how I understand the Old Testament, and even some things that would relate to Latter-day Saintism. I don't know what to call it. But from the get-go, you've got Adam and Eve in a perfect paradisical glory, and they fell. And it was within a generation, their first group of kids, where Cain forms a satanic covenant and kills his brother Abel, expecting to get rich from it. So from the get-go, you have that kind of falling away from God. And then you just fast forward not too far. You got Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, where it was small numbers. They start to grow. And what happened in Egypt, we don't really know, because Exodus starts off saying, one of these pharaohs didn't know Joseph, and so now these hundreds of thousands of people, I'm guessing, are now all slaves with no explanation. Okay, so something happened regarding whatever if they had themselves a covenant established relationship with God, they had obviously fallen from it, and they're taken out of captivity through the hand of God being manifest. What happens when they get into the promised land? It doesn't take too many generations later, and it's happening again. Throughout the Old Testament, again and again, you've got the prophets of God saying, hey, guess what, so-called self-righteous covenant people, y'all is going to get destroyed again. It happened in the day, like Isaiah chapter 1 is saying, guess what, covenant people, God is sick of what you're doing in the temple. He's sick of the sacrifices that you're making. If you don't give him your heart, you're going to be destroyed, enslaved, or scattered, and there's no exceptions. 100 years later, it happens again via Jeremiah, where he says, guess what, covenant people, the people that you have that are your priests and your prophets. The prophets are prophesying by the power of Baal, the child sacrificing past them kids through the fire, sort of prophecies that they're doing secretly. Your priests are profane. If you don't repent, you're going to be destroyed, enslaved, or scattered. Okay, it was in the Joseph Smith. This is the tradition that I was raised with. He's 14 years old. It's like, what's with all these Christian religions? And I'm going to get the very short version of it. He's shown, hey, all of these different creeds, many of them are trying their best using the written word, the printed Bible that they have, to what's the source that was given in the days of Jesus and the apostles. The specific claim of Joseph Smith is that, once again, the same apostles, Peter, James, and John, and even John, known as John the Baptist of the New Testament, were directly involved in restoring authority on the earth once again. And once again, now Latter-day Saints claim that authority resides in the presidency of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints today, when the scriptures do not teach any such thing. If I could share my screen for 1 second, I'll just share with you a scripture that LDS people in general very, very much, I guess I'll use the word hide from, but they very much avoid the following. Oh, come on now. My wireless mouse doesn't work, so be patient with me. I'm opening up right now to something that's specific to LDS. So this idea of apostasy happening again and again. Oh, tell me if you still hear me, because
I do. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've been. It's interesting to me just thinking of Nag Hammadi and all the Gnostic scriptures that come out afterwards that have validated. Like, you're like, weird. How did Joseph Smith know that Gnostic story?
Yeah,
about the sacrifice of Abraham almost happening.
All kinds of stuff. Now, what I'm sharing with you is indicating that that this apostasy happened again, even to the Latter-day Saints. Like, it's all throughout the Old Testament. It's throughout the New Testament. Like when Paul would write his letters to the different groups of people, he's saying, guess what? Y'all are off again. You've allowed this to enter the church. You've allowed that to enter the church. And he's calling them back. Same thing happened to the Latter-day Saints. Right now, they had been kicked out of Missouri. They're now in Illinois, and this is not the one. Come on, where are you? 124 is what I'm looking for, not 128. Silly me. And they were told that they're about to be rejected completely. So this is a revelation via Joseph Smith while the Latter-day Saints were in Nauvoo, Illinois. There is not a place found on the earth that the Lord may come to restore again that which was lost unto you, Latter-day Saints, or that which he, the Lord, has taken away, even the fullness of the priesthood. So the Latter-day Saints are told that priesthood, which was the foundation of you being able to establish what you have, it's taken away from you. And I'm going to skip forward to verse 32. And he tells them, at the end of this appointment for you to finish the Nauvoo temple and for you to start doing your baptisms there, if you don't do it in the time that I've given you, and if you do not these things at the end of the appointment, ye shall be rejected as a church with your dead, saith the Lord. And the Latter-day Saints never finished that temple that God commanded them to finish. So this idea of apostasy, the Latter-day Saints claim, well, clearly the Catholic Church went through this apostasy. That's the reason for their changing doctrines and for these things.
And the Catholics say clearly the Jews went through that apostasy because they don't have their temple. So
right, but that's twisted though. I'm sorry. Can I just?
Well, let me just finish this thought.
Sure. Sorry. Wow.
The Latter-day Saints, in the scriptures that Latter-day Saints claim are being revealed in their day to guide them in real time, they're warned also again that the apostasy is something that they face as well. The fullness of the priesthood taken from them.
Okay, so Yaakov, you're familiar with like the idea that with each, like you're describing the fall, and you say, you have the fall, and you kind of jump through history there. So you're talking about being slaves in Egypt, which I think it can be argued even just archaeologically and anthropologically that was more of like a work trade. It's a relative term, like what are we when, are we that much different, because it was wilderness and there was, work to be done, whatever. But there's this idea that the fall is perpetual, right? These things that come with the fall, even like, Solomon building the temple, even though his father is warned not to. Like, not just warned, but like, this isn't something that will be built with human hands. Like, it's not really a possibility, because the real temple is more relating to our organism. Like, that's the tetragrammaton. Like, there's something else happening here that we're building, and this externalization represents, it's like at the pinky toe of God. It's not the thing, but what you're saying is really fascinating, because I haven't heard this. I'm not familiar with the Latter-day Saint stuff, so I'm just sorry. I'm just tiptoeing into what you're doing, because
it's fascinating stuff. But it's like, and when I hit all those rapid fire little stuff, I realize all that I'm doing is just putting a whole bunch of dots out there, and it's almost unfair of me.
No, it's
but I appreciate
it's awesome, because what it's bringing up for me is this idea that this is maybe a little controversial depending on who you talk to, but there's this notion that with each temple there's a further degradation of the original conception, because we're in the fall, and the fall is continuing until the point, like when you get to the bottom, you go back to the top of the slide, so to speak, renewed, reformed, But
let me give a little bit about my understanding of the temple and about people having prophetic experiences in general, because the LDS temple, the very short version of it, it will depict the creation. It'll depict Adam and Eve put inside of the garden. It will depict how they fell from their paradisiacal state, their status where they're able to connect directly with God, and the steps to be able to return back to live with God. Mm-hmm. Now, there's different people inside of the scriptures. I'm just going to refer to the Book of Mormon. Nephi, who was the son of the first character in the Book of Mormon, the son of Lehi, he knows, well, Dad had visionary experiences, and in his taken up into the heavenly realm type of experiences, he saw the ministry of Jesus Christ that would take place 600 years in the future. He saw many other things, and Nephi realized, well, I'm not just going to believe that Dad had it. I'm going to ask God, can I have this for myself? And there's numerous chapters where Nephi describes, caught up into the heavenly realm, is shown the plan for himself, and he teaches his people, not just based off of here's the record that we have in the scriptures, but I've seen it for myself. And his ability to give commentary on the scriptures is informed by that. So Joseph Smith does claim to have that same sort of being taught in the heavenly realm. And it's my firm belief that we are all meant to exercise that level of faith. So as we try our best, given written word and the evidences that are available in the world for us to explore, that can help. I really do believe it can help, but I believe we are meant to learn it from the source.
Are you familiar with the Golden Bough at all? So the idea that
he's not familiar with the Golden Bough.
Is anybody here, like, you guys know?
I'm not a fan.
Okay. Well, there's the parts of the Golden Bough that were forced to be removed by the church after the first publication of the volumes. It's a massive work.
Say that again. I missed part of it.
It's from was it from Cambridge? It was like early anthropology. This was like the staple book basically, prior to Margaret Mead and everything that became of anthropology. So it's a little complex. But it's really important, because if we talk about Christianity, I was raised Christian, but my notions of Christianity are heavily affected by anthropology, as are a lot of people, like even like Tolkien or C.S. Lewis or something. It's like when they're relating to this, they're taking into consideration all these different traditions that we see Christianity being kind of an extension of, playing on a lot of the same ideas, particularly the ritualistic killing of the king. So somebody said earlier, this idea of the king that's actually like you could be seeing a poor person and you don't recognize that they're actually king. It's like a common idea in Jewish mysticism as well, is that you don't know who's an angel. So like you could be talking to somebody and you judge them and you don't realize that they're actually, they're in disguise, they're testing you or whatever they're doing, And I really love that idea. I think that that's really important. So there's an argument I can see, James, you have something important to say. I think a few of us we do, but I just really as quickly as I can. There's this idea, like Andreas, you brought up the book of Isaiah early in the conversation, and the prophecy of the Messiah as it appears in the Old Testament, and what the particulars are around that. And then you have the idea of the scapegoat. So when we're talking about like atonement, like if you look at ancient writings on the scapegoat, they're often, from my experience, just loaded with humor. Like especially like Jewish sources, it doesn't look like they took it very seriously. But at the same time, this is kind of the basis for Christianity, combined with the prophecy in Isaiah, which Jews do take very seriously.
The way that satanic Christians look at it, where the sacrifice of the shepherd is their immortality. Yeah,
totally. And there's two goats in the tradition, you know. So they tie a red string to the leg of one goat, and then they tie half of that string to the door of the temple. They murder the goat, and if in 3 days' time the string on the door of the temple turns white, it means it's taken their sins with them. But the idea of sin is different in Judaism, because there's no like personal salvation in like the Christian sense, because we're all collective. We're all dealing with each other's sins. Like every person that misses the mark, it affects the other people in the community and in the world or whatever, you know. We're all in this together kind of thing, you know. So it's also reminds me of like the Bodhisattva idea that like it's not until we're all saved is one really truly saved, you know. And that's actually like speaking of one idea around Christianity that I can't help but really resonate with, is this notion that if we are in fact all one, like if that's the eat of my flesh and the drink of my blood, if we really are all one, then if any individual within that unity penetrates what are our own limitations, that in a sense we're all destined for that in the long run, like in the end, you know. And you'll see that communicated in a lot of the Apocrypha in ways that from what I've gathered, I haven't really seen so much in the New Testament. Not necessarily the Gospels is kind of its own thing, but yeah, anyway, I don't know, I wanted to put a couple of those ideas out there, because the scapegoat notion, the ritualistic killing of the king, where they thought that it was believed that the health of the king was directly connected to the health of the kingdom. And so like that's an old anthropological notion. And so that then relates in terms of like because the Messiah in Christianity, that's the first time that the scapegoat is innocent. Like in anthropology, if you go further back, the king is always guilty. So it's not like anybody's like the pure one who can't, you know, that's above that. And so Christianity is kind of special in that way, because it took that idea, but then it was like, well, what if he was completely innocent, and what does that mean for everybody else if we participated in the murder of that individual, you know, and that right. Purity actually transcends space and time, you know. Sorry.
So I mean, again, I'm going to ask Seth a couple questions. One of them is like, because you grew up like as the grandnephew of the prophet of a church that was all about revelations, the way Jacob's just described. What did you believe the priesthood was supposed to do and have the power of, and like what were you expecting from the priesthood growing up? I mean, you talked about performing exorcisms in Taiwan and things, so a lot, I assume.
Yeah, totally. The priesthood, it's like, well, first of all, it's kind of, it provides a hierarchy, a hierarchical structure of power within the church. You've got, you know, the Mormon church has like different levels, Aaronic, Melchizedek, etc. And they mix in the concept of keys, which is, so authority gets mixed into the priesthood. So you've got hierarchy, you've got authority, and then you've got power. And so the power, they just kind of absorb all of the traditions of, you know, the Bible and Mormon scripture. So like every instance of a prophet invoking power, that is kind of synthesized into the role of the priesthood, you know, and like Mormonism kind of plays with that a little bit. Like even the concept of like the olive oil, like in the New Testament, laying on of hands for blessings and stuff, like Mormonism appropriates all of that into their priesthood structure.
Yeah, it's interesting, the idea of the power of the keys. I wasn't going to do it because he didn't show up, but let's just talk about it for a second. So the Society of St. Pius X, which is a like Catholic offshoot started by Marcel Lefebvre, who thought that the church was going it was transitioning a little too fast. Let's put it that way. So he was a very conservative Catholic, and he figured the only thing he could do to guarantee not losing the true priesthood, because the Vatican II was coming and they were going to change the thing. They don't do Latin masses anymore. He's like all upset. So he ordains secretly, in the dark, like 4 bishops to his own secret order, the Society of Saint Pius the 10th. And from there they start the Marian Corps. And he was excommunicated for doing this, but the bishops weren't. And so it's a major area of contention to the Catholic Church, because they're like, yeah, are they Catholic? Well, technically, are you? So I asked the question in this group called Sounds Like Heresy, or this was heresy. This heresy was settled at an early church council, but okay.
Well, I'm on that
group. I've been shut down so many times because it turns out this group is run by the Society of St. Pius the X, and they're just like, don't tell anyone we exist. Yeah, it's but they're like, everyone's arguing like, can they perform the Eucharist? Can they not? And the reason that that's a big deal, right? I think the Archonic Eucharist is going to come up here in a second, Saint Germain. The idea that the Eucharist is the magical, so Satan, aka Peter, takes the keys. He's got the keys to this Egyptian magical, like Moses from Akhenaten staff magic, right? That's what we're saying, because he's performing blood magic. And if you can perform blood magic, it's only because, it would seem, you've got the keys batoned to you through time, right? So they justify the existence of new priests and then this existing order, because a priest made that priest happen. So even though they're an offshoot, they're not really calling themselves a schism per se, right? Even though some of them were excommunicated, some of them are not. Sometimes they accept them, sometimes they don't. They don't know what to do about it, but it's like they acknowledge they have the power of the keys. And a lot of these Catholics will say they acknowledge that the Orthodox, because they had the priesthood to begin with, they still do, because they can make priests in their opinion. So what is this magical power? And maybe James, you got thoughts on this about the priesthood keys that they're passing on, from some source. Why can't I just make my own key? Oh, you're muted. Sorry.
Yeah, you're muted.
One sec. Yeah, because no candle lights itself, that'd be an act of magic, right? So it's like so there's this thing, and I don't know if it exists in whichever tradition, right? But there's the idea of initiation, right? And what that means is that you're conferring the light of the gnosis, right? Or under any of the other terms, right? You're passing that on to somebody, which does things, right? So spiritual, all of this, all religions and everything, it's an act of nature, right? It's all natural, right? So spiritual experience is actually a natural phenomenon. And so when this is performed, where you're given initiation or you're given empowerment into a practice, you are conferred permission to, in the case of empowerment, right? Or I'll separate them to be specific, right? Let's say you take empowerment into Vajrakalaya, right? Or empowerment into a mantra. You're given basically permission to use those things, which turns them on, right? So you can say the Gayatri mantra for years, and you'll get maybe 2 to 5% of what that does, right? And you'll build your own merit with it. There's always something that comes from that. Devotion of any kind. But then imagine, right? Let's say Kyrie eleison, right? If you just started saying it, right? Forgive me, right? Kyrie eleison. It'll have a certain effect, but imagine, right? Imagine that one of the priests or one of the monks from Mount Athos teaches you, right? there's this thing that happens where this mantra or this prayer has been said by the actual saints of that tradition, right? And there's something there. It's not, you know, we can't justify everything by material means because it's the last, it's the crust, you know. But there's this thing that happens where you suddenly get this shower of effects from these practices because you're connected to the egregore of that practice, which means that the actual body of any school or any practice is not physical, right? And if it doesn't have this egregore, you have a stillbirth system, right? There's plenty of people who well, I should have finished that thought. That egregore is not, you know, it's preeminent, I guess, before, you know. So you have different planes. Gosh, there's always so many different.
Are you talking about like the lineage and here's in the transfer of that power? Right, and
to use
so
actually it might be easy
to somebody who has a relationship with God, right?
Right.
So
Imagine
because I'm friends with the friend of the friend, I'm also friends.
Right, exactly. But that's a living thing, right? It's a living thing that you get connected to.
Coming like from
imagine
the ear and
yeah, that's still material, right? But
not necessarily.
There's, you know, not yeah, you and I, you know, not necessarily.
Tantra itself. I'm listening.
So you have the material plane, right? You have to. So all this comes together, and you start to have revelations about things. But okay.
Let me finish. Maybe you can bounce off this. I think I know where you're going, but
here I got it. So
okay, good.
So and maybe you can echo it with the Vedic tradition because I like when you do that. So you have the different planes, right? You have the material plane we all know and love, and then you have the and I'll just divide them into three, right? So you have the astral plane as well, and then you have the mental plane.
Terrestrial, telestial,
right?
celestial.
The mental, maybe.
Someone thinking celestial.
Go by this.
The high Z Selassie.
Go by this. I thought you said highly Selassie. I
did say
also
that.
an interesting.
Did you say that?
Oh, you did.
Sorry.
Oh.
So let him do it. Let him do it.
Yeah. Anyway, okay. So you have the so the mental plane, right? Your mind has never touched the world. It's not here. It's not actually here, right? And that's the plane where you still relate to God or deities in a way, right? Because your mind actually belongs to God, right? If you want to say it that way. But if you don't want to use such theological language, because that is like, you know, that's like senior stuff, right?
Well, the mind is God.
The mind is God. It's never been separate, right? So it's really just that you become veiled through so many different veils coming into incarnation, right? Because we're in the sublunar plane, right? We live below the moon. So we are subject to the emotions and all the other planets that we had to pass through to get here onto Earth. We're subject to all those laws, right? So if you read Gurdjieff, right, there's the idea of laws, right? How many laws you're under determine your free will, right? So you have to transcend all these things to really be, you know, to gain free will. If you go by Gurdjieff, right?
Well, Gurdjieff wants you to follow the laws to get free will.
Right, but we're not talking about laws like a stop sign. We're talking about laws like gravity, right? So
and we're talking about lineages
exactly.
And living traditions. We're talking about living traditions.
Exactly.
Yeah, we go back.
Right. So and then here on the physical plane, you have, well, on all planes really, but you have the elements as well, right? So
if I can just enter in here for just a short statement, going back to sound, that Tantra accepts that very good. Thank you. Sound going from the heart of one person out of the mouth into the ear and into the heart of another person need not be material. Since you were talking about Tantra, the idea of Tantra is there's a non-duality between matter and spirit. That is, matter is only posing as matter. It's actually spirit, which is radically immanent as matter in Tantra.
Right. And
that Tantra means to weave, because you're weaving together. It's a different type of non-duality than, let's say, the non-duality of Shankaracharya, if anybody's familiar with that form of Advaita. Tantra Advaita is very different than the Vedanta Advaita of Shankara. So I was saying that sound need not be material necessarily.
Sure, and you're kind of
and knowledge is sound. Knowledge, in fact, the ear is the most important sense of all, because that's the one for which the language enters in the sound and the categories, and the understanding becomes manifest.
Well, so what's interesting about the sense of hearing is that's the one sense where you really have the capacity for absorption into everything, right? Because if you think about your thoughts, right, what are they? It's really just self-referencing static that occupies your sense of hearing, right? So you can't listen to something and hear your own thoughts at the same time, right?
Depends.
So, but for the sake of that channel, that sense, right? As far as like concentration, right? The concentration practices to produce the Dharan, right? Which leads to
like
Dhyan,
one point
Samadhi,
Pratyahara. If your goal is to have one, you can't have two. If your goal is to have
I think this is a lot of like technicalities for people that don't
So-
understand the Veda.
Okay,
but-
so let me put it. Yeah, let's.
And
so
David knows a lot about
basically,
yoga.
as far as
And I didn't-
initiation goes, right? Or conferring permission, right? That's really an astral phenomenon, right? So that's what all these practices and actually ritual are doing. They're making true statements, right? And you're using your body as a tool to make gestures and signs towards those archons that are the actual core things of which we see the reflection of the reflection of the reflection, right?
I wanna get Jacob's thoughts on the priesthood, because he said he had some interesting experiences because he became a priest.
Yeah. So here's what ended up happening to me. I of course born and raised LDS, and the narrative is a very important thing in LDS culture. Joseph Smith received keys of the priesthood from on high, and he was authorized to pass those on through the laying on of hands to others. And the claim of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, it went through Brigham Young, and it's had in the church today. There, and Seth mentioned, I'd love to talk to you, Seth, sometime, just because I'd love to hear your background.
For sure.
There's two primary delineations in levels of the priesthood in LDS culture. Aaronic is considered preparatory, keys of the ministering of angels. Melchizedek is considered that power that comes from God, and when one has authority to administer the ordinances of the Melchizedek priesthood, the power of God is manifest, whatever that means. I know for me personally, I went through a journey and I knew that I was being put through a test. Here's how I knew it. I just started to keep a journal of spiritual impressions. Sometimes I would just kind of write down a question in the form of a prayer. Other times I would have ideas that would lock into place. On a few sacred occasions, I recognized a heavenly wavelength giving me insight, and I would write it down. I was given instructions to exercise the keys of the Aaronic priesthood. In other words, those preparatory keys, those keys that I understood as having the keys of the ministering of angels. I didn't know what that meant, other than that impression that I had written down kept growing without me putting any effort into it for a couple of weeks. I'm like, okay, how do I do this? I simply prayed like, hey, Heavenly Father, how am I supposed to exercise the keys of the ministering of angels? The idea that I had, I simply stopped by a small little private patch of grass that I knew of close to home after I finished my work at night. I knelt down, raised my arm to the square, and I simply say, I'm exercising the keys of the administering of angels, the Aaronic priesthood. I call upon the ministering of angels for an angel to be dispatched to me. And I'm still trying to figure this out. I'm trying to be obedient to promptings that I'm receiving. And I finish that prayer like instructions, and I offer my heart and my mind to my maker. Hey, did I do what you wanted me to do? And I recognized a simple response coming back saying, that'll do, pig, that'll do. It was kind of like, it was a feeling to where, yes, you did what you were supposed to do. Things started to happen, and it makes me laugh every time I say this out loud because it sounds ridiculous to me to say it, but it was undeniable to me personally. And it still goes on to this day. I get a parking spot provided for me everywhere I go. And I laugh every single time, and almost every single time I say a prayer of thanks in my heart saying, hey, you don't have to do this. You've already given me more blessings than I can count, but it happens everywhere I go. And I'm talking like day after Thanksgiving airport type of trip. And when I'm about to drop off my Peruvian mom-in-law and say, let me try to find a spot. Well, the one and only spot is the best spot. Okay, fast forward. I'm taken through a journey by which I learned that Joseph Smith was not the polygamist that Brigham Young and the church teaches him to be. Okay, I'm not going to share that whole story, but I got prompted. This was like I could feel the spiritual uptick, and it's culminating in me testifying to my elders quorum. I was the elders quorum president. I was the leader of the men in my congregation. And I testified in the name of Jesus Christ that Joseph Smith never taught polygamy, never practiced it, and that the scripture section 132 that claims to be Joseph Smith teaching it, I testified that it was falsely attributed to Joseph Smith. Okay. They freaked out. It was fun.
By the way, if you haven't seen that episode, like he goes into all this, and it freaking tracks. By the way, okay.
No, I'm not going to relate that because I want to make sure that I'm staying on top of like. Here's how I had power in the priesthood, like sealed upon.
God told you to do something pretty weird, right? Go against everything everyone told you to do. Yeah.
I don't use these words lightly when I say I had power in the priesthood sealed upon me. I was instructed a few months earlier, exercise the keys of the Aaronic priesthood for the ministering of angels. I didn't know what that meant. I did the best that I could. And now, after that experience, when the Spirit was telling me, learn this truth, which is completely against the traditions you've been raised with, testify of this truth that you now know. The very next day, I had a baptism of fire experience. I was guided on a prayer, and it changed me. It exploded my heart, exploded my body. When I've described it to other friends who have done psychedelics and things like that, they describe a lot of similarities, even though I'm somebody who has never used psychedelics. I became...
The psychedelics have used you, clearly.
That's the thing. Yeah, I don't mean to interrupt, but that's kind of the thing that most people don't understand about religious practice or spiritualism experience is it completely takes over every single sense, and it's nothing that you did on your own. And I mean, if you've tried acid or whatever you've done, it doesn't even come close.
Okay.
So go ahead, Seth.
So the following day, I got guided on a prayer, and it changed me. I became fully cognizant that I had at least one angel with me at all times, and it endured for 4 consecutive days. This is just January of 2020 when this happened to me. My desire to sin, like, miraculously gone. And I'm not a bad dude, but like wasting time watching guitar videos on YouTube was of zero interest to me. The pretty curvature of ladies that would walk by, which so naturally wanted to entertain my mind, gone. Like, with zero discipline on my part, I had simply been changed in that way. Okay. I became aware that I had at least one angel with me at all times, and it would manifest itself this way commonly. When I'm about to go knock, knock, knock on doors for Babylon and earn a Babylonian paycheck, I had already been guided just on experiences all day long, and I was supposed to
look at their green aprons. Sorry, keep going.
I was supposed to be already making money, but I could hear the Spirit tell me, it's like when I would offer a prayer in my heart and my mind, Heavenly Father, I don't want to be smooth talking sales guy. What do I do? Like, as if it's standing next to me, I could hear the voice of the Spirit say, just do this. And I don't know what this is. It says, just do this. Knock, knock, knock. Young dad opens the door. Hey, I'm sales guy. And I point to the major media company that's on my jacket. You guys don't have us. What do I gotta do? He laughs and he says, that's quite the sales pitch. You know what? You're talking.
Yeah.
Come on in. And I got guided on experiences like that. Okay. since that time, I have recognized a principle happened. I was being prepped for a test by which I had power in that preparatory priesthood sealed upon me. Here's how it manifests itself in my life today. I might be in a ministering situation and my heart connects with somebody and I feel desire to call upon the ministering of angels for them. I say a quick prayer in my heart and in my mind, asking my Heavenly Father for permission, and I almost instantly recognize permission, saying, yes, I'll raise my right arm to the square and I'll call upon the ministering of angels on behalf of somebody. And every time that I follow that process to where the desire's there, I recognize permission, I say the words after recognizing that permission, it manifests in that person feeling the effects of it instantly. And so there's, in other words, the principle that I want to impress is there's certain ordinations that a man can put on another man or a person on another person, but it was a test I had to be taken through before there was any active power in that role. Similar to the apostles in the New Testament, yeah, they all got ordained by Jesus. He breathed on them and says, receive the Holy Ghost. But it wasn't until after being trained up more, the day of Pentecost, to where that power in the priesthood that Jesus gave them, it did not become active or sealed upon them, is the term that LDS would use. It didn't become active until a certain point. So I've at least been through a preparatory test that I passed and had at least a preparatory priesthood power sealed upon me, which still remains active with me as long as I stay humble and diligent.
What do you think of the idea in terms of spirituality when we relate to like advancement, like an achievement, that might be kind of backwards? Like, because our notions around achievement is in the same way that like when you relate to knowledge as like an accumulation, that might be an illusion. Like that to me, like that seems to be like the significance of Da'at and why it constitutes the fall, is because, you know, you have this idea that you're building something in the same way, like you might think your body through time is like growing, like you're getting larger, when it's all relative, right? Because the cells divide in order to expand. So there's this idea of like accumulation that we relate to in life, and like all wealth and everything is attached to that. But at the same time, spiritually speaking, it could be argued that if, say, we're talking about yoga, like if yoga is what is already, like what always is already, then it's not necessarily like, it's not re-yoga. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like you have religion could be an acknowledgement of what you already have. Like, people don't generally want what they have; they want what they don't have. Like, when I hear you describing that state that you're experiencing, like, it resonates to me because it reminds me of that space that you can get to where there's nowhere, you have arrived, but you're also there already. So it's not like, it's kind of like there's a paradox in that. Like when you're, you know. Yeah.
Here's a couple of things that I recognize from what you're saying, Dave, and I don't mean to
Zanoni
dominate.
next.
Sorry.
But I recognize there's been certain sacred occasions in my life where I realized the whole space-time continuum became rather meaningless. I had a visionary experience when I was a young missionary, 20 years old, trying to understand the atonement of Jesus Christ. And during that visionary experience, space-time continuum was meaningless. It was probably, and a couple of other times when I've had information given and it'll be faster than I can snap my fingers, there's a whole scene that was given to me. So, and I also connect with, in Jeremiah chapter 1, Jeremiah is talking about his calling, where the Lord's speaking to him. He recognizes the Lord's voice and he says, I'm just a child. And the Lord says, hey, Jeremiah, don't tell me you're a child. Before you were born, I knew you, and I already ordained you a prophet to the nations. In other words, there is a lot of things that may seem familiar to each one of us, and maybe others going through this life journey. And I think it is kind of those eternal remembrances of cycles that we've been through before. There's something to that effect that I recognize in my life and the life of pretty much everybody else that I discuss these things with.
All right, Zanoni.
Yeah, I really relate to your path, Jacob, of kind of spiritual growth and evolution. I'm wondering, David and James, I guess, James, when you're talking about the melody, I feel like we are coming back to that a lot. And that melody I think of as being union with God, kind of deep mystical experiences. And is that really the goal of spirituality, to have this union with God, to have these mystical experiences? Or is there something outside of that? Because I personally believe there's something apart from that. even though that might be what unifies the different religions.
It's as varied as all the actions you've ever had in every lifetime, you know. So some people have incarnated to have truly awful lives, right? And that's a ritual in a way, right? They dress themselves in a body that has a particular birth chart where they will go through things that they've tied on because they've acted in the world, right? But sometimes masters do that because they have karmas from being a physical person, you know, a physical being, that they accumulated in all the other lifetimes, and that's standing in the way of having better, you know, a different life where you're maybe initiating people, liberating people, things like that. Like, for example, in the Tibetan tradition, they have this set of practices that are really advanced, right? This is beyond samadhi, right? Samadhi is the start of all of it. So they have in their system something that relates to heart, like the heart seed. And without saying too much, they can take karma, right? This is the Nyingma tradition. They can take karma that they recognize now, and they can cast that into a different incarnation. So you have Tibetan masters that are incarnated in a few different places, or they've cast off a seed that contains all that karma that is in their way of reaching liberation in this life, and they've cast it into something, into, you know, another part of them that will go through that karma, and then it'll be done, right? And sometimes if you understand this and you look at history, sometimes some of the worst people in history were actually veiled masters that were doing dirty work, or they had some karma that they were purifying, either for a whole culture, right? By making them go through cultural karmas, or for themselves, or for the sake of you know, knocking somebody else's dominoes to start an effect, right? This is all enlightened activity of masters, right? Which we should understand is beyond us right now, because we may not have samadhi in this group, but you know, that's what it leads to, you know. Because every time you incarnate, you go fat. If you reach samadhi once, right, you have that experience of the self, which is gnosis, right? This is knowledge, right? This is Sophia, right? So Sophia is the wisdom that you are not the body.
Yeah, it's the knowledge, and then it's like it's hekmah, and then what's below keter? What's understanding?
Oh, you're saying Chokmah and Bina? You're saying Bina?
Bina is understanding. You need knowledge, and then it's Bina. Sorry, keep going.
So to comment on the Kabbalah for a second, the modern sort of take on Kabbalah is I like this term that I've heard somewhere, kablabla, right?
Most of what's called Kabbalah right now, like, isn't really Kabbalah.
It's
like
not.
the Kabbalah Society
Yeah,
stuff has basically nothing in common with anything traditional yet.
Exactly.
Like the province
there's
of like
many,
old
many,
rabbis,
many different
not younger,
trees.
like advanced
There's
rabbis.
Yeah, there's many different trees of life, right? And they all connect to each other. So it's not
Right. There's
like,
no depiction in the Zohar of the
it's
like
not
in
the
the
chakras.
yeah. No.
Right. So
no.
But what's interesting, what you said about da'at, right? That is wisdom, right? So that's the Holy Spirit in a way.
Interesting. You think da'at's wisdom instead of hokmah? You don't think hokmah is the wisdom?
Well, so I've tried to get through Dion Fortune's mystical Kabbalah so many times, and
Well, if you want to know, like Da'at
but-
is the source of the Masonic G. So when people talk about the Masonic G, that's the pathway of Gimel between Keter and Tiferet. And so it's complicated, but with as much brevity as I can, in order, if you're looking at this representation, which isn't entirely accurate, it has extra pathways that actually don't exist here that are in the Zohar, but they do this. But anyway, if you're looking, that there's what we call the lightning flash, where you extend through the tree, which is kind of like zigzag. In order to get from Bina to Chesed, you have to cross through Da'at, but there's actually no pathway there. Even though it shows something here, it's really misleading. Because it has Kuf up there, and that actually belongs to the bottom. But anyway, so you have the path. All the pathways are wrong here. They're labeled wrong. I don't know where they got this. There's different systems. Like there's the Ari system or whatever. But if you're talking about like the Golden Dawn system, like people treat it that's as early as like what, the 18th century. But actually, you can find. I found it as early as the late 15th, early 16th century. Writings where it's described the exact same way, where you have those attributions actually being applied to the tree. And so, like, even though Kaplan won't acknowledge that in like the Sefer Yetzirah, you'll find that. But in order to do this kind of leap to get from what Andreas was pointing out, is like understanding to Chesed, the top of the lower worlds, that zigzag, there's actually no diagonal pathway there, and those are dimensions. So like this, when you're talking about like the cross, like that you have like the vertical is like the spiritual, and the horizontal is like the material. You have the in between. So the Klipot actually rule temporarily, so to speak, rule the lower worlds through those 12 diagonals. So you actually have to pretend, in order to get that 777 lightning flash that extends to the tree, you have to pretend that Gimel is a diagonal when in fact it's vertical. It's a spiritual dimension, but we pretend that the spiritual dimension is somewhere in between. And so that's actually like, if even like in Freemasonry, when you have the 33rd degree and why they associate that with the G, most people don't know this, even most Freemasons don't know this, is that it's actually because you have 32 pathways belonging to the Kabbalistic tree, because you have 22 connecting pathways of that correspond to the 22 Hebrew letters, and then you have the Sephirot itself. Sephirot means numeration, by the way. But so if you're looking at that, then you say 32 pathways, and then you have Da'at. And so Da'at becomes a 33. That's why symbolically, like when you're going through the 32 levels of Freemasonry, you have to get approved by a special council. I don't know that much about it, like some people do, but I understand that there's this big distinction between 33 and the 32. And so that has to do with Da'at, which is knowledge.
Second ceiling.
I guess I'm just wondering.
And I wanted go ahead. I wanted to.
Oh no, just what the end goal is. Is the end goal moksha? Is it?
I don't think this is a
and let's say what moksha means for people, because I don't think
moksha is liberation.
Moksha.
No one will expound upon it for 3 days if we let them.
The verbal root means to release.
Isn't moksha a Vedantic term, if I'm not mistaken?
Huh?
Didn't moksha come about through Vedanta, or am I wrong?
Vedanta. When you say Vedanta, Veda Anta means the end of the Veda, means Upanishads.
Right. I mean,
final
that was
final incarnation or release from carnation.
You say Viveka Kiyakti is what is it? Asampragyat Samadhi, the like higher levels.
Asampragyata is part of Yoga Darshan. So there's all these. That's why I say if you keep all the things distinct, you can understand it better. Moksha. Just look at the grammar, right? It means to release, just at the base level. Now, convention is stronger than etymology, to be frank. Words mean as people use them ultimately. But when it comes to Vedanta, you're correct. Yeah, Vedanta is the discussion of moksha. Essentially, Bakti comes from the Tantra. But the Tantra and the Veda actually do interact. We don't know how old either of them are, but they're both very old.
So the question was, is there just one goal in all of this? And the answer is no, because you have a lot of different ends to systems, which is like their end, right? So in Noah will talk about the yoga, Mahasamadhi, all those things, moksha, really liberation, right? In Buddhism, you have sort of basically not wanting to exist anymore, which is like receding from all being.
That's not correct.
Which is
it's anti-categorical. They don't want to categorize what it is. So it's like a very strong non-duality that cannot be described. They are anti-categorical, nominalists, but they don't want a non-existence. It's not non-existence. In fact, Buddhism cannot be non-existence because they have a four-cornered argument.
Yeah, because
which they say there's
because
the
what
reality
happens,
is neither existence,
and this
it's
is my
neither non-existence. It's neither both existence and non-existence, nor it's neither existence and nor non-existence.
We're gonna do another show just on the Veda again. We're gonna do them at least once a month. That's right.
So let me
category.
Let's
let me cut
go.
through for a second though, right? So like what happened with the Buddha, right? When he achieved nirvana, maybe he wasn't there anymore, but 1,000 pieces of all his realization went out, right? So that's why we say there's a million Buddhas in the universe, right? So you can't really have full liberation from incarnation, right? Existence is pure joy.
Ooh.
Right? So that's
what about eternal paradise?
You're not trying to
like not have eternal heaven where you have incarnation. It's like an everlasting incarnation.
Yes.
So
in Hinduism,
you can.
In Christianity.
So if like practically speaking, right? We can go into the specifics of any system, right? Practically speaking, you can have the experience where you build a relationship in this lifetime with the part of you that has never incarnated, was there at creation, is immortal, and will always be there, right? If you cross that, which is crossing the abyss, by the way, right? You lose yourself, but you gain this. You start to wake up, sort of up here, where like Plotinus talks about the couplement, right? It's the part that never descended, right? So it let down a little fishing rod of karma into a heart seed, and then you incarnate, right? Because a window opened and you took it, right? But that part is never descended, right? So that's always still there, right? So you can experience the part of you that has never left, and there's no coming or going, right? It doesn't move. It doesn't have that distance, right? Which is why certain qualities start to happen for somebody that starts to touch on that, which reflect the qualities of God, which is omniscience, omnipresence, and omnipotence, right? So you start to have siddhis, right? Which is where omniscience, clairvoyance, the faculties of truth, right? You start to see things before they happen, and there's different ways of that. Omnipresence, that's like Pythagoras was seen in Samos, and then in Athens in the same day giving a lecture. There's gurus that are alive today that students have said they've seen him when he wasn't there, but he was really there, right? And then you have omnipotence, right? So like Babaji, right? Or so that's like powers, right? So existence is pure joy, right? Existence is pure joy. If to not want to exist anymore, or to want to have liberation from incarnating, is to admit that it's evil, which I don't think it actually is, right? Or if you're looking for everlasting heaven, that's I'm sure in this conversation we're bumping against people's belief systems, but Ezekiel, right? So Ezekiel, he ascended into heaven bodily, right? There's many.
Enoch, yeah.
Enoch, that's right. So there's nothing that says that they don't come down and hang out with the monks on Mount Athos every Easter or something like that. Or so you also have Taoist immortals, right? one of them, I can't remember her name right now, but she was said to ascend into the heavens bodily, right? Meaning she took her body, right? So there's no limit to the experiences that you can have in creation, right? And there's no limit to the heavens, so to speak, right? So you can have immortality in the heaven with your chosen and preferred for as long as you like, if you have the attainment there, right? Which means that the afterlife can't just be a confusing dream that's either good or bad, right? You have to be aware. You have to be there, right? So, so there's plenty of, like, if you really put all this stuff together, all the saints that ever were, they're either incarnated or they're hanging out with their chosen and preferred, right? But it never ends. It never ends. So you can have any experience that the world provides. That there's not just one thing where you got such a good grade that you got to leave detention, material detention. There's nothing like that. But yeah, 2 hours.
What do you mean? There's some,
I got a couple. Oh, okay. So no, go ahead. Sorry.
No, like, well, can Jesus not? I mean, from my beliefs, I believe Jesus can free us from that detention. That we can enter this eternal paradise through Jesus. But some of what you're describing, I mean, it sounds very solemn and it sounds very serious. And I'm wondering, like, this higher self, can it be a stand-up comedian? Can it be playful? I mean, like, where's the room for?
Yeah, absolutely.
The word deva means play.
I mean,
yeah, literally.
It comes from the root Dave. Deva's play.
Yeah. So
play.
So I think the Mayans had this thing that they called the laugh of knowledge, right? It's like Saint Francis or one of these saints. He was witnessed laughing and floating in the top of the chapel, right? Because he was so wrapped up in his devotion that's something that was happening. It all seems so serious, right? But it's not.
Yeah.
I mean, even if you die, it's like, it's hard. It's like the death of a child. That's unfathomably terrible, heartbreaking. But, that soul that did that never got touched. It didn't. The body, the husk, experienced all of that, and then it's done, right? So that's something. So,
hey James, can I just ask real quick? Were you referencing a Crowley quote when you kept saying that existence is pure joy, or
yeah?
Can I? That's one of my favorite quotes of all time, actually. Where he says, if I can remember, I hope I got it right. He says, "Existence is pure joy. Failure to realize this is the cause of all sorrow, but this is not necessarily a misfortune, for we invented sorrow, which doesn't matter so much after all, in order to have the exuberant joy that comes with re-remembering, or the exuberant satisfaction that comes with re-remembering that existence is pure joy. Existence is thus a sacrament." That's a good one. That's what you were referencing when you kept saying that?
I'm divided for love's sake, for the chance of union.
There you go. Yeah, you got it. Yeah, thank you.
Exactly.
I don't like everything Crowley has to say. And speaking of humor, that guy had a great sense of humor. My rabbi, when he comes up, that's one of his main critiques on the guy. He's like, well, I'll say one thing. That guy had a great sense of humor.
Well, also, I'd say, like, if it's a quality or attribute of a saint to sin in their lives, then, he must have really been one of them.
Crowley, I mean, Crowley is a crazy wisdom master. Like, he's really an incredible example of crazy wisdom, which the West doesn't they don't understand that. It's like Rasputin was a crazy wisdom master, right? Maybe not a master to the degree of Crowley, but that's, if you look at all Crowley's past lives, he's kind of a rascal through time, so he's like a really interesting soul, because that was Edward Kelly, It's like that, if you read the story of Edward Kelly, even the angels were kind of like, like, come here, punk, like you're gonna do this, right? And then if you follow his incarnations through time, you see somebody that's that is always going through heavy karmas, doing really interesting things in the world, and kind of shows that it's open to anybody. It's like Crowley's lifetime kind of show, like he revived so much, and he also, I think he did try to he actually kind of well, so I won't say that, but
during a time where everything was thought as heretical, he tried to find out what all the heretical things were. Yeah.
It's skeptical.
Sure, yeah, he's like the opposite of Krishnamurti. Like Krishnamurti was doing everything he could to renounce his position as world teacher, while Crowley was trying to do everything he could to.
Well, you got the I almost cursed, but you got the guys, the Theosophists, right? You got the pederast Ledbetter, right? Trying to make this Messiah happen.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well, it's probably not going to be engendered by a pederast. Yeah.
So like, Christian, where he's going to hate teachers.
I think we need to. This is like, because we're skipping subjects, so we're going to talk about the modern purpose of priesthood in a second.
Are we, or is this just a theosophical conversation ultimately? Because you put all these heads.
I think you could just sum up Krishnamurti by saying his teacher molested him, so he blew up teacherdom.
That could be. That happens a lot. Wait, I wanted. Okay.
Has everyone seen the Boney M. Rasputin video from the 70s? Oh,
what's
you
that?
got it.
Oh, is the music video?
One of my dad's, so one of my dad's friends in my dad's English, one of his friends in London, was there as a boy for the death of Rasputin.
Wow.
And he said that he watched him crawl on the ground. He was stabbed. They shot him. They poisoned him. And it was only the frozen river that I think it was his sister, drowned in, right? And he went in that as a boy, he went to try to save her and almost drowned himself. And it was odd that was the only thing that killed him, right? But it's interesting.
All right, so I was going to ask Jacob about like celestialism before we get into modernism, because I do want to, because the idea that before we got to Crowley, a lot of that stuff with the 3 levels and planes, like that's Mormonism, and also Paul, because Paul talked about the celestial, terrestrial planes, right? And also that you glorify, you become more than you are. So Jacob, I'm sorry, but I wanted to know, like, what do you believe about like this kind of goal? Like, is it kind of sounds similar to you, or what would you describe yours as?
Yeah, very much. I've alluded to it previously in this conversation, the nature of the fall of Adam and Eve, that they were once in a setting prepared on this earth that was more like the heavens. It was a paradisiacal, if you want, multisyllabic word, but it was a paradise here on earth. We are meant to return to that heavenly realm, having gained the lessons that we're supposed to learn here in this earth. So yeah, it's something that has to be overcome. Regarding the born again experience, it's meant to burn off that dross that is holding us back. It's meant to burn off the things that are keeping us from achieving it. So the whole celestial and the effects of the priesthood in it, it is my understanding of the priesthood is much less about structure and hierarchy in an organization. And my understanding of it is much closer to having the power that God endows you with because you've proven yourself trustworthy of it. And in other words, when I'm talking about priesthood, in my own experience and the way that I read the scriptures, individuals exercise the level of diligence and faith to be entrusted with something which very few on the earth get to experience.
I would caution you not to throw out authority so quickly, though, because it can calibrate the new revelation and the power that comes with it. So I think we need to find I think the kind of project of this kind of forum that Andres created here is how do we, because we all have authorities in our tradition, how do we, who are all experiencing the power of the tradition in various levels, how do we negotiate with the authority of the tradition so that we aren't just creating new religions haphazardly unless we intend to do so. And so sometimes it's a new religion. It's just I feel like it shouldn't just be happening under our nose. Like
don't crucify me for saying this, but like, how do I restore all of your churches at once here? You know, just fix it. But and also Seth is a. I want to ask Seth about because throw a dialectic at us real quick, right? We're talking about you're going to build a thing and it's going to make things better, right? So how are you going to build a purpose for the modern priesthood? What do you say, Seth? Take it away.
Yeah, definitely. I try to incorporate a synthesis type approach to a lot of different things. Synthesis of religion, a synthesis between theism and atheism. I think that's kind of where we need to go. So like the way I look at this whole project of religion, it's like this heaven concept. It's more of a evolutionary metaphor, right? If we do all the right things, then our genes are going to get to propagate, and the heaven is the genes telling you you're going to be happy because we're the vehicle for the genes, right? The genes are the God that we worship and follow. And so all of this kind of brings us back to the purpose is, how do we not go extinct, right? That's what the genes are aiming at. We got to do the good things. And so the game theory, it supervenes or it tracks well-being, right? The well-being, if you're living properly, you're going to have good well-being. If you're doing the wrong strategy, you're going to have bad well-being. So the strategy tracks well-being, which tracks evolution. And so a neo-religion, in my perspective, it's got to synthesize and track that goal. And so for me, the modern problem, we have to track the modern problems. And so there's this concept of a meta crisis. And so if I was to simplify the meta crisis, which is really hard to do because meta,
it's kind of funny, expression even.
Yeah, meta, it kind of means it's the summation of all the crises, right? So we've got a crisis of unity. Like that's a big deal. Like that could be very destructive that we're all disunified. We have a crisis of epistemology. We're less and less able to know what truth is. If everyone has their different truths, that feeds into the unity problem, which is bad for our evolution. We have a problem of axiology. What should we actually value? What should our axioms be as a culture, as a society, as a global species? So we've got to kind of figure out how to unify instead of, disunify into chaotic conflict. And so for me, a neo-religion would need to build a structure, perhaps a priesthood structure, that is aiming and working towards solving these problems, promulgating solutions, education. So like a church type structure is where you educate people on, the findings and the conclusions of the sages. And in order to inculcate these lessons into the people, you got to have practices. That's why religions, they have rituals, because we need to build these lessons into our psyches and embody them. So we have to have practices. And one of the important things of the priesthood or a religion would be to help cultivate a sense of the sacred. So when we're figuring out what's most important for our society, that those most important things are what we want to feel as sacred, so we protect them. And we have to negotiate what those are. And so the process of getting all the way there, I agree that we need a system of authority, but I think it needs to be emergent rather than top down. I think a lot of the failures of the past, the tyrannical king, the corrupt priest, the cult, you've got this, if you have a top-down structure, once the top gets corrupt, the whole thing falls apart. If you have a bottom-up approach where you've built in checks and balances, you've built in metrics to where people earn their authority within the hierarchy. If you figure out how to make the system, a really wise systems engineering approach to filter out corruption, then perhaps you can have a system that can persist without.
That's the golden bough. They had both, because you have the king, but then you have the recognition that if this is just allowed to go without being trimmed back, so to speak. If you're not going to trim back the tree, then it'll eventually become destructive. So they had kind of these strategies in place for how to circumvent that issue. So yeah, by bringing in an outsider, allowing him to challenge the king. If he kills the king may even kill himself. So we get like the idea of the suicide king from. It happened in different ways in different cultures, but it's that idea that unchecked power left to its own devices will eventually destroy the kingdom, because the king and the kingdom are so connected. And also just attenuated by inbreeding, that's a problem too. I'd say you look at some of these rulers, even George W. or the Queen, they I don't know, I'm not, I don't know, but it just looks to me that there's been some incestuousness going there, just keeping it in the family for too long. I don't know.
George W.
What's that? Sorry.
How dare you talk about my beloved George W.
I think he would laugh.
He was on Ellen.
No, the thing is, like dude, when people, I'm sorry, but like, I like that. I could say
it's a religious podcast.
Oh, okay. We're having a different style. I'm sorry, I'm used to think tank. But it's like, when people, like the guys from South Park did some show on him or something, and then they asked him about it, where they're like a bunch of babies. I can't remember what it's called, like the tiny bush, and he's got Dick Cheney there, or whatever. And and they asked him about it. He's like, I thought it was pretty funny. And it's like, dude, I like that. It's like, that's a good way to navigate it. They're like, hey, did you drink blood or wine out of Geronimo's skull? And he's like, yeah, we did a lot of weird things.
I mean, all right, it would at this point be only prudent to mention that Aleister Crowley had a deep fascination with Joseph Smith and the Oxford Academic article about that. We'll put that in the Discord. But we are 2 hours deep. I know people want to know the difference between yoga and religion and why religion is different than union and all that. But how about everybody just kind of go around and like share a little last like bit that you want to get out. And if you're down, let's definitely do this again in the future. I'll split it up. I'll make more people. We'll do it different ways. And I definitely will. I'm going to set up a Vedic podcast and another Latter-day Saint podcast. So Seth and Jacob and Zanoni, Noel, and Jermaine, you can jump back and forth. So like whatever you guys want. But go,
yeah.
Guys. I'm gonna call you Saint Germimes. Okay. So who wants to start? Maybe we'll start with look at you. Go ahead, Hermimes.
Yeah, because I just wanted to talk on what Seth mentioned about atheism, how it has to be kind of synthesized into the cosmology of all these other systems, and the way I justify it is that it's kind of a function of incarnating, right? Physical life. Like there is no God but man, right? If you know the Liberas, right? That's something that gets really confused. It's actually kind of from this Sufi axiom that there is no God but God, right? Which is Islam too. That's in Islam. So Crowley's edit there is no God but man. He's saying the same thing, but he's trying to say that man is God in a form. It's never been, divided for love's sake, for sure. But what I think
isn't he saying the opposite? Isn't he saying like, I'm sorry, but like, isn't he saying man cannot understand Yahweh or the Elohim fully? So all we have are our mustard seed archetypes about the kingdom of heaven, right? Like, we made our word for God, but it's not the thing.
It means if it's going to happen, we have to do it. That's really what that line means, right? It means that we're not appealing to something else that's going to punish people for us or whatever, to do the work for us. It really means there is no God but man, meaning that that although there's omnipotence and omnipotent, well, same thing. So it's by invitation. That's why in Hermeticism, invoke often. That means invite that presence often. But commenting on atheism, what I find is that people who are very, very into the sciences and the physical world and positivism, right? That's Mercury, right? That's a very mercurial aspect, and you can actually see it in people's charts that they won't come across the spiritual path in some cases. Like, I don't think Capricorns, like a Capricorn sun, right? Not horoscope stuff, but like I think a Capricorn moon, I'm not sure. So there's you can see it in somebody's chart where they won't come across the spiritual path. They're still doing stuff, it's still there is enlightenment for the body, there's like level. It's like people can have enlightenment of the mind and it never touches their body, and they'll have bad health and their body will fall away. But then you have like Taoists who are enlightening their body, it's like the body of light, right? That's enlightenment of the physical body, right? So I still think that is the place that a materialist or an atheist is, sorry, that comment just booted my thought.
An atheist is practical to the cosmogony, or to understanding they have a place in the
material salvation.
Yeah, exactly. And they're organizing matter, and they're applying the intellect to matter in a mercurial way, where we have the sciences, we have actual. It's like there are mysteries of matter, right? So atheists, or we'll say scientists, because they seem to go together, they're doing that, right? They're doing that. They're changing the terrain upon which we have the possibility of reaching enlightenment. So in the future, when we're on CBDC or UBI or whatever, and all the jobs are gone, it's probably the perfect time to, sit back, or not sit back, but to spend your life on the spiritual path, because of all the work of all the positivists, the atheists, the scientists, the material sciences, and creating
a lot of these religions
a better
started
world
out
for minds and hearts.
A lot of these religions started out as science, like the Sumerian temples, and they're to algebra, and things like that. So there's room for that logic.
It's like
we're gonna create that immortality that the theists have been dreaming of.
Yeah.
Well, they don't just dream of it, but what's interesting is you're going to have people who are going to live so long and realize there's no purpose to anything, that they may actually eventually happen upon the spiritual path, because it's really the evolution of the mind, right? If you look at Ouspensky, you might find Ouspensky interesting. He says in Man and His Possible Evolution, that the body evolves up to a point, and then it plateaus, and then it starts to go away. The mind doesn't do that, right? So you can have a really old body that is not evolving; it's decaying. But what's being sent off from that, right? Like if you think of a rocket ship, right? The body are the boosters that fly off and go back to the earth, right? But that spaceship, right, is the mind. It's the heart and the mind, right? That, well, even beyond the heart, it's the mind. It keeps going. It goes to space, into the infinite, right? So that's something to think about, that spirituality still fits in the scheme of evolution. It's just that so far, the scientists have only caught on to physical evolution.
Shofar? No, sorry.
Sure. Yeah. What do you mean?
Sorry, Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, who was into spiritual evolution, Terra Chardin. But maybe then, who wants to go next?
I'll go.
Zanoni.
Maybe I misunderstood you, Seth, but I mean, based on what you were saying, you mentioned some problems. I'm just wondering about the problems of climate change, nuclear destruction. I just don't see. I see this world as passing away, and I don't see the genes passing along for much longer. But I would be interested to have a conversation with all of you just about the afterlife in particular.
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, just a focus on what our specific beliefs are, how they're compatible, how they're different.
Sounds great. Maybe David?
Yeah, I mean, just one little last spiel, kind of summation of sort. Yeah, I mean, I guess things that came up for me while listening to everybody talk that maybe I didn't mention was like, like I have this kind of culmination of my studies, at least with Zohar, and what my takeaways from it are like the idea that no sacrifice is for nothing, that the things that we do and the effects that they have go beyond what we could even conceive of in our own, our own ability to have a vantage point on that. And I don't think anything is for nothing. And I think that that's kind of like something that Nietzsche kind of communicated to in like The Birth of Tragedy, was this from the Spirit of Music, where there's this like you were talking about the different music, and how I think that there's something to be said. There's like a misconception when it comes to what organized religion has treated like that, or like what we see connecting us. Like we'll often like say you meet somebody and you want to find out what your commonality is. Like even if you go on a date or something, you're like, what do we have in common? And that's good, that's great and everything. But like I think that there's something to be said for the deeper aspect of ourselves, the truly impersonal aspect of ourselves. Like that is where you go to when you're going into like spirituality. And I think that there's a paradox to it. I think the deeper that you actually go into yourself, like even like Vipassana, like you're literally like you're following sensation beyond what we normally relate to as sensation, like the subtlety, the different levels of that. And I believe that when you go deeply enough into that actually connects you to other people that you like, and it is impersonal because we're actually all one in that way. But I think that there's a bit of a paradox there, because I think it's from that vantage point that comes with going into that space, there's actually kind of a recognition or an appreciation even that's just like a byproduct of that state that recognizes the diversity as beauty. And so like in like a higher sense. So I it's funny because like, and you know what I mean? Like when you try and connect with people and you just want that commonality, would you really want to live in that homogenized society anyway? Like, suppose you got to say, like, when you're talking about variance of opinion, like if everyone had the same opinion, how awful that would be, And so like, and that's one of the things that I found myself just like inevitably just like, I wouldn't say I'm a full blown theosophist, because I wouldn't even, because that's kind of like almost like a contradiction. Like if there really is no religion higher than truth, then what does it mean to be a theosophist? And like there's things presented by Blavatsky that I don't always agree with. So I'm not going to take it like this is my identity or this is my belief system, because that would be the antithesis of the ideas presented there in the first place. But point being, I like all these different perspectives all coming together, and like just, and it's the nature of that. I really enjoyed this conversation. So if we're going to, step away from this conversation, I just want everybody to know like how much I've appreciated just the different contributions and the different places that people are coming from. So yeah.
Same here. This has been.
Sorry, that's an adorable son you got there, Jacob.
I just
great.
found him.
Oh yeah, he's doing all right. So just feed him 3 times a day. Noel, I'm going to ask Noel first. Noel, what do you think about? Yeah.
So to stay on the topic of the, we were talking about, Seth actually introduced the 2 words of power and authority earlier, and I think that's really what has to be negotiated. I can only really talk with the system that I'm familiar with, but in the Vedas, essentially the solution is scholar meditators. Someone is a scholar of the tradition, they know the tradition in great detail, but they also engage in the work of the renewal of the tradition within their own prayers in their hearts to God, or as they conceive of the Supreme. And also regarding the personal and the impersonal, it was from David, the impersonal and the personal, I would offer that they are actually the same, although they do appear to be quite quite the opposite.
There's distinct but not separate, I think we can say.
I think we essentially, it sounds like we agree.
There's a point. I'm waiting for that.
So, and then I apologize if I accidentally cut off Zanoni when he was making a point, but I just had to say something particular. But I would like to hear more from you, and I'm also glad to finally meet you face to face, James. And I appreciate your peace and calm, and I also feel inspired by Jacob's living the tradition, and Seth's insight into the future of traditions, and Andre's graciousness as a host.
You know how it is, Noel. Noel, you're for such a sattvic character and spirit of light, you can be a bit majestic. No, do the gurus agree?
I'm very majestic.
All right,
fire
well,
is the first element, source of life.
A friend for life, though. Yeah, for sure. Fire in the soul. Seth, what do you thought? What are your thoughts?
Yeah. So yeah, I do feel a little bit like a little bit of an odd man out here as the atheist on the panel.
I think everyone felt that way. They're like, "Why are you doing this to me, Andreas? Why are you making me do this?"
Yeah, but I think it seems like the concept of like the goal of a neo-religion still seems a bit hazy, but to the extent that the goal is some type of a unity where I think just like the poor will always be among you, the atheists will always be among you. Hopefully there's a way to unify theists and atheists under one framework. But I think it's going to be a little bit tricky. And so I'm curious to see how this develops, to see if it can be something compatible for both sides. But just an example, philosopher Nietzsche, he talked about the death of God. Well, from my perspective, I think that the death of God is going to get worse as we go into the future. We're going to have the death of the spirit with neuroscience. We're going to have the death of free will with neuroscience. And this is only going to get more and more obvious into the future. And so if you're building a religion on an unstable foundation, once the science comes through and obliterates it, it's another apostasy. So I'm looking to see if there's a structure that can survive into the future.
That's perfect. Jacob,
probably
your son's producing alchemical magic in the background there. He's actually.
I'm telling you, I just left my garage door open and this kid comes walking in.
It's a miracle.
Now he wants some fruit snacks and goldfish. I was like,
smart, wise young man. I agree with everything. Give him his demands.
I'll tell you what, it is fun having little brown babies because people will say nice stuff. They'll be like, "Oh, he's so cute." I know, I found him in the parking lot. And there'll be a laugh, but you could see in their eyes that quick questions like, "Do I need to call the authorities?"
Yeah, if you're in California, I would. It's happened. But yeah, sorry.
Here's my thought. My thought is that we have a creator that loves us, and we are meant to know our creator. And in my experience, what I understand from reading the scriptural tradition as well as applying it personally in my life, there ain't nothing that we can offer that does not already belong to our creator except for our will. And the words that I connect with the most is to offer our maker our broken heart and our contrite spirit. And I've come to understand that as I've tried to understand, so what does that mean? What is that offering? It is full submission to God. Arms up. I'm not even protecting my vital organs. I'm yours. You have to learn what that means through personal revelation, the same way that Abraham had to learn it, the same way that Jesus had to learn it. And you have to make the sacrifice willingly. So it has been my experience and the testimony. I'm going to end with a testimony meeting. But the testimony that I have is we get baptized by fire and by the Holy Ghost. And those are the words that I recognize in the scriptures. It has been life-changing for me. It makes it easy, makes it the most natural thing that I feel. As a result of that is it's easy to love people that I get to connect with on the internet, even though I haven't been able to hang out with you in person yet. It's easy to love others that I come in contact with. And I believe that kind of connection that now becomes natural is one of the byproducts of making that full submission to our Creator.
You know, that trial by fire stuff, I don't think any of the Hindus told you, but when you say that, that triggers like the Sita
If
trial
it's
by
similar
fire. They
to
love
curry,
it.
if
They
it's
love it.
similar to the curry food that I've had from there, I'm sign me up.
Well, all right. It's been 2.5,
Curry is
but
life.
guys, I want to do this again soon. And thank you very much for opening up the dialogue between interfaith discussion. I think it's great. And you know what? You're all apostles in my church. Good job. All right. Peace.
This next story has been suppressed by mainstream media. Let's go to Andreas for more.
Everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarians.
Recent Tartarians. Recent Tartarians.
Hello. Welcome to the xChurch. Tune in for another exciting episode of wonder, imagination, and discovery.
Recent Tartarians. Recent
Она образует
Tartarians.
всеобщие закономерности, определяющие законы классической физики для нашего
Sometimes I
мира.
look at the moon and just think, the skin's beautiful. Baby, when I met you, there was peace unknown.
Что касается энергии наномер, то она превышает ядерную в немыслимое число раз. 10 в 74 степени.
That's it. That's it. That's it. With your arms now. That's it. That's it.
Thank you for watching xChurch. Keep listening. Remember, if you enjoyed the video, please follow and subscribe and share and support. It really helps. Coming up next, xChurch.
By the way, that's gone. If you didn't record that, that's gone forever. It's gone.